let you know when to begin. Okay, live is up. Sergeants, will you begin your recordings?
PC recording all set.
Now, welcome to today's New York Remote Council fiscal year 2023 primary budget oversight hearing on the Committee of Public Housing. At this time, will all panelists please turn on your videos? To minimize disruption, please place electronic devices on vibrate or in silent. If you wish to submit testimony, you may do so at testimony@council.nyc.gov. Again, that is testimony@council.nyc.gov. Thank you. Chair, we may begin.
Buenas tardes. Good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to my first hearing as the chair of the Committee on Public Housing. My name is Alexa Aviles, representing the Great District 38 in South Brooklyn. First, I must express my deep thanks to all the hands that make this hearing possible, from the Sergeant at Arms to council staff to tech, finance, policy. Your commitment to our city is appreciated. To the NYCC staff, to my city council colleagues who are here, thank you for your partnership. And lastly, thank you to my incredible team. And thank you to the residents of public housing for all that you do and everything that you have endured and all that you've accomplished. Thank you all. I did not live in public housing as some of my predecessors, but come from a family with a long history in public housing, from my grandmother in Baruch houses, to cousins in Lillian Wall, to tias in Coney Island, to friends in the Pink houses. Public housing is one of New York City's greatest assets, housing hundreds of thousands of working class New Yorkers for multiple generations. We must acknowledge that we are not here by happenstance, but by direct decisions to defund and deprioritize public housing at all levels of government over the decades. Throughout its history, there have been many direct attempts to get rid of public housing, but tenants have fought back. And because of that, New York City public housing remains the last bastion of affordable, accessible housing for low-income people, the lifeblood of our city. It is our duty to protect and preserve public ownership of public housing and to ensure that public housing residents live in healthy, safe, and dignified homes. Simply put, housing is a human right. Today is the first of many oversight hearings to come. We will be hearing testimony from the New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA, on its fiscal 2023 preliminary budget and 5-year operating and capital plans for 2022 to 2026. 2 years into this tragic pandemic, COVID-19 has claimed the lives of nearly 70,000 New Yorkers, deeply impacting NYCHA and exposing the long-standing systemic inequities in our country. The pandemic highlighted the importance of the city's social safety net, and NYCHA is a key component of that social safety net, providing truly affordable housing and facilitating access to social and vital community services. I want to extend my condolences to all the families impacted by COVID, residents and NYCHA workers impacted by COVID. My own family lost 4 family members to COVID. 2 of them were public housing residents. As we initiate the budget process today, we hope the hearing will lead to better understanding on how the authority's budget and how the agency intends to administer those funds to help and protect the nearly 400,000 residents that call NYCHA home. It is important to note that NYCHA's budget is not part of the city's budget, and its fiscal year follows the calendar year. The 2021 year-end operating budget for NYCHA reflects a balanced budget for the last quarter in 2021. In December of 2021, the NYCHA board approved its 5-year 22 to 26 operating and capital plans, which for 22 projects an overall deficit of $35 million, with revenues of $4.1 billion and expenditures of $4.2 billion. The authority's adopted 22 to 26 capital plan provides approximately $8.1 billion in planned commitments for infrastructure improvements, major modernization, system upgrades, repairs, resiliency, and fortification for developments damaged by Superstorm Sandy. In total, over the 5-year timeframe, NYCHA expects to receive about $3.3 billion from the city, including $125.2 million from the City Council. We have all bore witness to the crisis, whether covered in the news or not, to the many atrocities of no heat or hot water, walls so soft that you can put your hands through, insect infestations and garbage, compactors that don't work, the list goes on. NYCHA residents are frustrated and highly skeptical of agencies and officials with long track records of ignoring the issues, or in many times providing substandard response. At the same time, we know there are many NYCHA workers giving their best and making magic with little resources, and we thank you for their service. I know there is little trust from residents. I ask your patience and your partnership to do the best by you. I know this committee is a place of spirited debate and many opinions and experiences, and we hope to continue that tradition. I will say, we know it is not just a lack of money, the problem that we are experiencing, but a multi-layered problem of a capitalist culture who puts profit over people, of structures built to fail, of mismanagement, and a cocktail of many, many other damaging ingredients. Most recently, we had hoped the federal government would deliver through its infrastructure bill, but that has failed. Had NYCHA been the Pentagon, we'd be flush in cash. And the state, unfortunately, continues to anemically support the authority, while the city continues to bear a larger and larger burden of the cost and costs that are increasing daily. Despite these profound challenges, we are here collectively to protect and preserve public housing and to improve the conditions of residents. We are expecting to hear the plans of how the authority will effectively and expeditiously expend these resources to bring the aging and damaged buildings, systems, and grounds into a state of good repair. We anticipate hearing about the authority's response to the COVID pandemic, an update on NYCHA's receipt of federal COVID funds from the CARES Act. We also will expect to hear from NYCHA on its increase in rent hardship applications from tenants, the decrease in monthly rent collection rates, and the status of its RAD PAC conversion program. Before we hear from NYCHA, let me take a moment to recognize my colleagues who've joined this morning. And I hope I haven't missed everyone. Councilmember Julie Wan, Councilmember Kagan, Councilmember Stevens, Councilmember Barron, Councilmember Sanchez, Councilmember Brewer, and Councilmember Osei. Thank you so much for joining this important conversation today. As is the standing tradition of the committee, I will now ask NYCHA resident leaders to open with comments and questions before the agency dives into its budget presentation. Thank you so much again for your patience and your guidance. And I will pass it over to the facilitator.
Thank you so much, Chair. As Chair Avila has stated, the committee would like to maintain its longstanding tradition of hearing from residents first. So before we hear from NYCHA, we will call Karen Blondell, followed by Aixa Cruz. And then afterwards, I will go over a few housekeeping matters for the remainder of the hearing.
Time starts now.
Ms. Blondell, you should have received a prompt to unmute yourself. If you've received that, please go ahead and unmute so that we can hear your testimony.
I just got the prompt. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, New York City Council and New York City Housing Authority. I'd like to thank my New York City Council member, Alexa Avelis, the chair of the Public Housing Committee, for joining us not only here, but on the ground in Red Hook and for allowing me to speak today regarding the New York City Housing Authority budget. My name is Karen Blondell, and I'm the president of the Red Hook West Resident Association. I'm also a Harvard Loeb Fellow at the Graduate School of Design in Cambridge. So I do know about the infrastructure issues in public housing, and I am able to convey that to other residents in my community. I'm also the principal founder of the Public Housing Civic Association, which is another venue that we want to use to make sure that the residents understand the difference between Rad Pack and the blueprint, just for an example. When we talk about the budget for public housing, we're talking about a figure that's in flux. This figure changes, and I know back in 2017, there was a $40 billion deficit. So one question I do have is, now that we've converted over 150,000 units to RAD and gotten income from PAC, I'd like to know how that budget has been adjusted. Has it gone down? Do we have more? Do we have the same or less? Also, while I'm here to advocate for more money for the stabilization of over 130,000 units of public housing, I'm also here to advocate for long-term solutions like the
Time
Preservation
expired.
Trust. Well, how much time did I get? 1 minute? Also known as the blueprint. It's not just the budget we're asking for, but we're asking for it to be spent. Last year, I think NYCC only spent 6%, which may account for pandemic conditions and things like that. But we really want to know where the money is being spent and where it could be spent effectively. And since my time is up, I'll just send this in by electronically. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Blondell.
Thank you. We will now hear from Isaac Cruz.
Time starts now.
Ms. Torres, you should have been sent a prompt to unmute yourself.
Hi, good afternoon. My name, good afternoon, Council Speaker Andrea Adams, Councilwoman Alexa Aviles, Chairperson of the Housing Committee, and the City Council members on public housing, and all the council members who have joined this meeting. My name is Aixa Torres, and I am a public housing resident, and I'm here today to fight for my home and the future of public housing. I am urging the City Council to adequately fund and provide stronger oversight over the New York City Housing Authority. Mayor Adams released his budget for the city. The mayor's budget is identical to former Mayor de Blasio's budget for NYCC. Mayor Adams has also reneged on his promise to spend $4 billion on a year on housing. However, the mayor's fiscal budget adopted a capital plan that includes $300 million to support NYCC's rental assistance, RAD, right? However, and I stand with the NYCC citywide council presidents and the residents to preserve public housing in calling on all levels of government to accurately fund public housing. The residents of public housing are urging New York City to include the following in the fiscal year, and that $3.4 billion in capital funds for the NYCC for the fiscal year 2023, baseline annually, $2.8 billion in the operating funds for NYCC in the fiscal year 2023, baseline annual year after. This funding is necessary to address address NYCHA's
Time expired.
this focus. I will submit my request in writing to all the council members, but I just wanted to say thank you to have this opportunity to open as a resident in public housing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Torres. So normally in a general oversight meeting, we would have more residents testifying at the top of the meeting, but given this is the budget presentation, now we will pass it along to our colleagues from the New York City Housing Authority. I'm sorry, Audrey, if I jumped the gun here.
No, no worries at all. We are all anxious to receive their testimony. I just need to go over some of the boring stuff, some of the housekeeping matters to help the Zoom meeting run as smoothly as possible. My name is Audrey Sun, and I'm the counsel to the New York City Council's Committee on Housing and Committee on Public Housing. I just want to remind everyone that you will be muted until you are recognized to speak. When it is your turn to speak, we will call your name and you will receive a prompt to unmute. Please accept the prompt if you are prepared to speak, and the sergeants will set the timer so that you can give your testimony. And please be aware that there may be a bit of a delay in muting and unmuting, so please be patient. During the hearing, if council members would like to ask questions, please use the Zoom raise hand function and we'll call on you to speak in turn. In the interest of time, we will limit council member questions to 5 minutes each, and then we will circle back once all the members that have asked some questions have had a turn to ask. At this time, we will now move to testimony from the administration. I will begin by administering the affirmation to the members of the New York City Housing Authority, which is represented today by Gregory Russ, Daniel Sherrod, Anika Lescott, Sean Mavani, and Brian Honan. I will call each of your names in turn. Do you affirm that your testimony will be truthful to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief? Gregory Russ?
I do.
Daniel Sherrod?
Yes.
Anika Lescott?
I do.
Sean Mavani?
I do.
And Brian Honan?
I do.
Thank you. You may begin when ready.
Thank you so much. And welcome to the chair, members of the Committee on Public Housing, other distinguished members of the City Council, and NYCHA residents, members of the public. My name is Greg Russ. I am the chair and CEO of NYCHA. I am pleased to be joined by the Chief Operating Officer, Daniel Sherrod, Executive Vice President of Finance and Chief Financial Officer, Anika Lescott, the Chief Asset and Capital Management Officer, Sean Mavani, and Vice President of Intergovernmental Relations, Brian Honan, and other members of the NYCHA team. Thank you for the opportunity to present the adopted budget, which was approved by the board in December 2021, and discuss our efforts to transform the agency and our residents' homes. I would first like to congratulate all the new members of the City Council. I look forward to working with you to serve the NYCHA community. And I also want to thank Mayor Adams for his partnership and support. We met last week at our facility in Long Island City, and it's clear to me that we share a vision of quality housing and services for NYCHA families. This is a moment of significant change for the authority. We have new leadership, the Chief Operating Officer and the Chief Asset and Capital Management Officer and the Chief Compliance Officer, for example. And we are instituting the organizational changes that we outlined in the transformation plan, which was required as part of the HUD monitorship. At the same time, we are reckoning with the greatest threat that the authority has faced in its 88 years, the compounded effects of 4 decades of federal government disinvestment from public housing. Often I am asked, how can this be? And the fact of the matter is, once the housing was built, there was insufficient funds put back into the housing to keep it in good repair. And if you look at the history of public housing, and we go all the way back to 1937, the first round of funding should have occurred in 1957, and it did not happen. And every 20 years after, we should have been putting money into these buildings. What does that mean for us today? That the days of piecemeal fixes, of putting a Band-Aid on the aging or deteriorated buildings are over. The residents know this painfully well, with a nearly daily cascade of serious issues that range from roof tops to underground piping. We have experienced this in sharp relief this heating season. And it's not for lack of trying to work harder or working smarter. We have increased our staff levels in critical areas, and we are improving the way we do business. But what does disinvestment look like when it's 80 years old? It's 80-year-old piping that is giving out behind the walls. The chair mentioned how soft the walls can be. That's because the pipe behind the wall is no longer capable of holding the water or steam or whatever it was supposed to carry. And then we have the boilers and elevators, the roofs, and issues around mold, lead, and asbestos. Across the portfolio right now, we need $40 billion in urgent repair, capital repairs to counteract and end the degrading of the residents' quality of life. That need is growing at the rate of about $1 billion a year. The residents should not have to put up with the conditions that they currently have. We have a responsibility to bring our buildings the investment that they need as quickly as we can. And that the only way that we can do this is to ensure our properties can serve the residents for another century is put in comprehensive modernization into the building, like we are doing in St. Nicholas and Todd Hill and Staten Island. To bring top to bottom renovations and upgrades to every building, we must use every tool in the toolbox. That includes PACT and the Public Housing Preservation Trust. These initiatives have two things at their heart. One, protect resident rights, and two, raise the money for the investment that has been missing. Our residents are relying on us to take action now. The very future, in our view, of the housing that we own and manage is at stake. Despite best advocate efforts at our federal level, it is clear that the only serious and viable plan on the table right now is the public trust. We are continually reminded that we cannot depend solely on federal funding alone, and that we must implement a creative local strategy to bring residents the quality of life they deserve. Today, you're going to hear testimony that's going to center on two large themes. The first is the operating budget, and these numbers illustrate the need for a new approach. Operating funding from the federal government is separate from the capital funding. It has its own separate formula. NYCHA does not apply to HUD for money. We get a formula distribution based on what Congress appropriates in that year. So that's very important to remember. Part of that formula includes rent revenue. And that is a place where we've been having a problem. Rent revenue, which is about a third of our budget, is down significantly by 30%, largely due to the pandemic. The current rent shortfall has climbed to about $311 million. That's a significant sum that we could use today, if we had it, to repair the buildings that we currently have. For 2022, with expected operating revenues of about $4.1 billion and expected expenses of about $4.179, we anticipate the $35 million deficit that was mentioned earlier. We believe over the course of the fiscal year that we can close this gap through a variety of techniques. However, with the increasing operating demands and without additional revenue, anticipated annual deficits do begin to climb. 2/3 of NYCHA's operating revenue comes from federal sources. This year, we expect to receive about $1 billion in federal operating subsidy. However, as we noted, the other third of our operating revenue comes from rent. And we expect to collect about $867 million in rent this year. That's $130 million below what we should be collecting. The 2022 budget assumes federal funding based on what's called a proration. And I think council members should hear this part. Not only do we have a formula funding for the operating subsidy, but often Congress does not appropriate 100% of the formula amount that's generated. So it's important to recognize that we have to budget in what's called a proration, which we estimate this year at 96%, about $43 million less than what we're eligible for under the operating fund formula that Congress established and HUD implements. We also expect to receive a welcome $276 million in city operating funds. One program we wanted to highlight too this year is we expect to receive about $1.4 billion in Section 8 vouchers and associated administrative fees. The Section 8 program is deemed a high performer by HUD, despite the fact that it too is underfunded based on HUD's formula. NYCC receives Section 8 funding based on our previous year's expenses. This means that we're really funding about 84.7% of the vouchers we are actually authorized for. So that translates into funding about 88,000 vouchers. We're authorized for 106, but we're only funded for the 88. Full funding of the Section 8 program would be something that we should all be advocating for. Our projected expenses in 2022 include $1.3 billion in Section 8 payments to landlords, $1.5 billion salaries and fringes, $487 million in contracts, $524 million in utilities, and $339 million for supplies, vehicles, and equipment in the operating budgets. A significant portion of our expenses are fixed, such as utilities and employee benefits. As part of our efforts to close this year's budget gap, we will use $100 million of our operating reserve. That's going to leave us with about 1 month's worth of reserve for fiscal year 2023. We are also using about $80 million in what's called restricted proceeds from the RAD impact deals. And we are shifting 35% of our federal capital grant for basic operating costs. This is because of the lack of investment in the buildings is driving up the cost to simply maintain them. That rate is accelerating. The capital deficiencies are causing more things to fail and make the repairs more complicated and more expensive and more difficult to do. So we cannot rely on federal funding alone to maintain our properties. Majority of the buildings are more than a half-century old, and the federal, city, and state funding that we receive is currently will not meet their needs. Think about this. Our need in New York is 20 times the national appropriation from Congress. That's a staggering number. And we receive an average of about $469 in tenant rent, $573 in HUD operating subsidy, about $119 per unit in city subsidy per apartment. So that's about $1,161 a month. However, it costs close to $1,500 a month to operate that same apartment. Despite the funding constraints, we are invested in the areas that affect residents the most. Even with the decline in rent revenue, we have increased our investment in the HUD agreement pillar areas by $162 million over the past 3 years. For fiscal year 2022, we received $300 million in new requests from our staff, largely to address the pillar areas in the HUD agreement. We were able to craft a budget that will fund about $137 million of that. But I wished we could have funded the full 300 because almost everything on that list was connected to something that we should be doing in the field. That included money for our transformation plan efforts. These are the efforts to retool, restructure, and reshape the way NYCC does business as an institution. That funding also included an additional 250 skilled trades to carry out the work order reform initiative that we're undertaking this year. We also plan to hire about an additional 200 more janitorial staff and supervisors to maintain our grounds and buildings with a completely revamped janitorial schedule. We funded 100% of the requests from the property managers regarding their supplies and equipment. And we also budgeted for additional overtime considering the needs of the stock. We allocated $38 million in additional funding for the HUD agreement pillar areas, and we included in those funds costs for planning and comprehensive resident engagement for the comprehensive mod that we're doing, heating investments, asbestos, lead, and mold abatement, elevators, pests, and waste management. These investments pertain just to operations and would be additional to the capital that we'll talk about. We're expecting to spend substantially more over the next several years to continue to address all the major areas in the HUD agreement. To present the budget in full, I'm going to ask Anika Lescott, our Chief Financial Officer, to do the next part of this presentation.
Thank you. Sharing my screen. Good afternoon. My name is Anika Lescott, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer of the New York City Housing Authority, and we're going to share a little bit more about our operating budget. So in 2021, we thankfully ended the year on balance. This is an improvement from the $25 million deficit that we adopted for the fiscal year. As Greg mentioned, our fiscal year is on a January to December basis. We had some pretty key things that happened during 2021 that I will note here. In terms of our sources, as Greg mentioned, we get three main sources of revenue: our tenant rental revenue, which accounts for about $1 billion, operating subsidy from HUD for the public housing program, which is another $1 billion, and our Section 8 revenue, which comes out to be $1.4 billion. And that includes the pass-through payments to to landlords, housing tenants, as well as our administrative fees that we use to run the program. We did see a pretty dramatic decrease in our tenant rent revenue, as Greg mentioned, and that accounts for most of the variance that you're seeing on the right-hand side. Thankfully, to make up for that difference, we received more operating subsidy from HUD, additional Section 8 revenues from HUD, and additional city funds for staffing and for our other special initiatives. In terms of other revenues, we received some small payments from FEMA to support our COVID-related expenses, as well as some reimbursements for employee health programs. So in all, we were able to take in $107 million more than we expected in terms of revenue. And that was, again, a decrease in tenant rent revenue, which is offset by funding from our federal city partners. On the uses side, we spent $82 million more in total than we budgeted, and it comes in a couple of places that you will see. So in terms of our salaries and overtime, that is the bulk of our uses. Most of the funding goes into the salaries. As you see there, $1.4 billion budgeted. We spent a total of about $1.6 billion. We had less individuals on staff, and we were carrying vacancies of about 1,000 at any given time, owing to the pandemic and the rate of hiring. And we had to supplement that by increasing in overtime spending. So the people that we did have on staff had to work longer hours and more to be able to continue to provide services to our residents. In terms of our other than personnel spending, which accounts the remainder, over $2 billion of our expenses, we spent on supplies, contracts, utility costs, Section 8, and other expenses. So in all, we do expect that the 2021 budget, which we are closing right now, will close on balance. And I will go to the next slide. Greg mentioned our monthly rent collection, and we have been having difficulties since the start of the pandemic in terms of consistently collecting our rent. So the chart that you see below shows you from January 2020 all the way through December 2021, the total dollar amount that we collected in each month. So it is normal to see some ebbs and flows in rent collection. It does follow seasonal trends. We normally do collect more in March and April, for example, during the tax season, and also in December when individuals try to catch up on their rent payments. The red bar that goes across is what we needed to collect on average to be able to hit our budget targets. So on average, we needed to collect $89 million per month in 2020 and $87 million per month in 2021. And as you see, the gray bars, which is our total collection in that month, consistently did not meet the targets. So we only ended 2021 with a total of $898 million of rent collected. And our tenant receivables topped $311 million. We anticipate and estimate that the COVID pandemic caused about $218 million more of tenant receivables than we have seen in the past. At the same time that one of our major sources of operating revenue, our tenant rent, was decreasing, our investments in the HUD agreement pillar areas was increasing. So the blue bars that you see below is the total dollar amount of operating funds that we spent in the HUD agreement pillar areas: heating, elevators, pests and waste, mold, and our 3 compliance departments: compliance, quality assurance, and environmental health and safety. 2018 through 2020 are our actual expenditures. And at the time, 2021 that you see, that's our budget, but we do anticipate that our final numbers will be right on track. So the orange line that you see going down, that's our rent collection. So you see that our rent collection rate is going down, but at the same time, our spending in these areas is going up. And lastly, our 2022 sources and uses. So we wanted to end by showing you much of what Greg was saying in terms of the testimony, each of our sources and uses and where we expect to be towards the end of the year. So as Greg mentioned, we passed a baseline budget with $137 million in new investments in the transformation plan and pillar areas. The key things that we funded were additional staff, both in the properties and in skilled trades to help with the work order backlog, and additional investments in each of the compliance areas in the HUD agreement. We did that through a couple of new things. One, we took $100 million of withdrawal from our unrestricted operating reserves, and we are also applying $80 million that was earned from our RAD PAC deals in restricted proceeds to this budget as well. We are anticipating and submitted to HUD a waiver for $53 million for a rate reduction incentive. Essentially, what we are asking HUD is to be able to keep 100% of all the utility savings that we are seeing as we invest in more energy efficient measures. We don't think that it is likely that HUD will grant that waiver at this time. At the end of the year, we are anticipating a year-end deficit of $35 million. And without additional revenues from our federal partners and others, NYCHA will not be able to continue this trend of increased spending. And as Greg mentioned, the way that we mitigate our deficits, we look very closely at our spending. We track the federal appropriations bills, and thus far, we do anticipate that we might receive more than was budgeted in the federal operating subsidy, which will help to close that gap. So Greg, I'm going to turn it back over to you for the capital portion of the budget.
Great, thank you. Let's talk about the capital now, as that is a complementary discussion. Both the operating capital really have to be talked about together. We have about $2.9 billion in capital funds for 2022. That includes an anticipated $700 million in federal capital funding. However, I'd like to point out to the council, we're guessing at that number. We do not have a budget in Washington yet. Therefore, we're not exactly sure how much capital money we're going to get this year. Another reason to think about why it is that we need to create a solution for capital that is locally based and driven by the properties that we currently own and manage. So we have the $700 million that we expect from federal, about $410 million in city funds, and rollover funds from prior years. But that is barely a dent in the $40 billion that we do need. For 2022, we're allocating about $773 million to heat, $245 million to facade, $264 million to repair roofs, $205 million to elevators, and $53 million for security and fire alarms. Since January of 2021, we spend on average about $63 million a month in capital projects from all sources. More than $1 billion in construction is currently underway, and NYCHA consistently meets or exceeds HUD's deadlines. HUD has a deadline of 2 years to obligate, that is put under contract, and 4 years to spend for federal capital money. And we exceed those deadlines by an average of 7 and 16 months respectively. In addition, we are committed to raising our spend on the city capital, committing to reaching 23% or $231 million expended by the end of the fiscal year. and this is a significant increase over what we did last year. We're incredibly grateful for the city funding we've received. It's vital to the quality of life, and we are looking at ways to streamline the city funding approval process and work with our partners more effectively on expanding these dollars. This includes enhancements related to vendor management, increasing our use of alternative project delivery models that allow us to select for quality and other critical value for money factors in addition to cost. Also, we've heard over and over, I'd like to see what is going on with each of these particular projects. So to that end, we are going to provide greater transparency this year. We are going to set up a web-based site, and I'm going to have Sean talk about that in a second, that would present the details and status for each of the capital projects that we're currently managing. Sean, if you could show them what the tracker is proposed to look like. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Russ. Good afternoon, distinguished council members and other participants at today's hearing. What you see up on the screen now is a mock-up of a capital projects tracker that we're aiming to release on NYCC's website within the next 1 to 2 months, as Chair Russ mentioned, to increase the transparency around capital projects and our accountability to schedules. On the left side of is the main landing page of the tracker with an interactive map. This allows the user to filter and zoom on various criteria that you can see there as examples like the borough, the development, the project status, and the funding source. The green circles on the map represent NYCC developments, and clicking on these will bring up a list of projects active or completed at each development. The user will be able to click on a specific project listed on the map or in a table that also shows up below, and you can kind of see an individual entry on the left on the bottom, but it's a little bit cut off by the Zoom screen. And that would take the user to a project-specific page, and you can see an example of that on the right of this slide, right? Giving an example for Astoria and a playgrounds project. The project-specific page includes a description of the scope of work of the project, but also shows the project phases, along with the level of progress to date, both visually in this green bar, as shown here, and through text description. The planned and actual start and end dates for each phase of the project, as well as the project funding amount and sources, will be presented on the left side, as you see here as an example. And additional information, including the project manager and a link the user can utilize to contact NYCC about the project, will be on the right side of the page. So this is an initial mock-up and design that we're working to and demonstrating and validating with residents and others. We'll continue to add additional project details and functionality to the tracker in future releases in 2022. And eventually, we'd like to also integrate capital needs information for each development into the same view, so that is publicly available for residents and other stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Briefly, an update on Sandy. At the end of 2021, we've completed $2.47 billion worth of Sandy recovery projects. These include roofs, electrical systems, boilers, exterior lights, cameras, security systems, backup power, and flood protection. We expect to complete 90% of this work by the end of this year, closing out all 3.2 billion of the Sandy recovery work by the end of 2023. But I must point out, remember, Sandy and FEMA only fund what they think was damaged. They don't fund the complete building. They don't fund needs above a certain level if the water only went to a certain level. So Sandy is a partial fix to some of the issues that we're dealing with. Over the next several years, we plan to replace 356 elevators, 357 boilers at scores of developments. But what we're finding, just putting a new boiler in is not going to be enough. We have to go after the associated infrastructure, the underground distribution system, the pipes in the walls, the heating components, the apartment radiators. And these are the things that require such an extraordinary amount of money. Since 2014, we've invested over $200 million in cameras and other security measures, and another $100 million in lighting. We've replaced 220 roofs and that's benefited about 52,000 residents with the roof replacement. While all this capital and this operating is being generated, we are investing in another thing, changing the institution. In tandem with our efforts to make these improvements, to try and maintain what we have and to raise the capital, there's a transformation plan that requires us to make substantial operational and organizational changes. These are designed to improve customer service, improve responsiveness, and give more insight into how we do our work, something that's been demanded, and we think rightly so. The transformation plan was created with ideas and feedback we received directly from residents and staff. In fact, it's the first plan that NYCHA has made available for public comment. The Resident Roundtable continues to help us shape the plan and its implementation. A vital element of the transformation plan is the neighborhood model. This creates smaller property management portfolios and pushes the decisions down closer to the properties. To strengthen property-based budgeting, we've been training our property managers and some of our resident leaders on these budget concepts as well. Combined with the neighborhood model, we also have work order reform initiatives. This has been such a pain point, and rightly so. We need to change how we do business here. So we're moving skilled trade staff, such as painters and plasterers, down into the neighborhoods to help with these repairs. We're going to change and simplify the way you schedule the repairs. And we're going to allow all related work orders for the repair to be scheduled at once through one phone call rather than sequentially the way it is now. We began rolling out work order reform by borough. We started last November, and we hope to have this in place citywide by the end of the year. As I mentioned, the budget provides for additional skilled trades to help us support this initiative. We recently also authorized changes to our janitorial schedule to allow site-based schedules and reform of the schedules that we were operating under. The intent here is to put more caretakers on the grounds and in specific buildings, allowing for increased accountability through additional supervision. And these changes we hope will be fully implemented by the end of summer. In line with the transformation efforts, we've strengthened our organizational leadership. Daniel Sherrod brings a vast experience as our Chief Operating Officer. This month, we've also appointed a new Chief Compliance Officer, Brad Greenberg. And I mentioned Sean being appointed as Chief Asset and Capital Management Officer. That division will handle all the investment we make in any property, whether it comes through real estate or comes through capital. That will be his purview. In addition, he's charged with reorganizing the capital division to create a more efficient project-based management approach. So this division will be the one that will reposition the portfolio over time, incorporating innovative building materials, construction methods, and technologies. And I ask the council members to think about this. If we can secure this capital, and if we can secure it to the level that the building needs, we can put heating systems in these properties that don't rely on a central boiler, that don't rely on underground distribution lines. They would be far more efficient and able to give residents far more control of the heat in their unit. This is actually possible, and that's the potential that the capital brings and why we're so insistent on trying to pursue ways to raise that money. Finally, we have the Permanent Affordability Commitment Together Pact. With our Pact Preservation Initiative, it's truly transforming these sites. We have targeted 62,000 apartments for the RAD and Pact program, and those programs are designed to generate capital, and they have about $3.4 billion in capital funding for comprehensive apartment renovation and building infrastructure. At the present time, that serves about 15,500 households. This includes much needed improvements to everything from kitchen and baths, upgraded building systems, elevators, grounds, including playgrounds. About $579 million in reservations have been completed. $2.8 billion in the upgrades are underway or will begin early this year. Another 19,700 households are part of active development projects in the process of resident engagement or pre-development. This will bring us sometime this year to about 35,000 apartments completed in construction or in the stage of resident engagement and pre-development planning. This, coupled with the Public Housing Trust, would bring top to bottom improvements to the entire portfolio. Bringing investment back to these buildings and restoring them is the most pressing issue we face. We cannot wait, residents cannot wait for sufficient federal funding to suddenly materialize. We must address these challenges now with sustainable, realistic, and comprehensive solutions. We will continue to work hard to the best we can for residents with the resources at our disposal. And we will advocate tirelessly to raise the capital funding that our buildings need. Thank you for standing with us in this fight for our residents and the future of public housing, and we are happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Chair Russ. Before we move into questions, I'd like to acknowledge several council members who have also joined us since we commenced. Councilmember De La Rosa, Councilmember Ressler, Councilmember Ayala, and Councilmember Salamanca. So thank you so much, colleagues, for being here today. So I guess I will start off again. Thank you to the NYCC team for the presentation and the information. I guess I'd like to start off at the federal level regarding federal funding to NYCC. In the current 2022 adopted plan, NYCC anticipates receiving roughly $1.3 billion in federal capital funding, more than double the $608 million received in calendar year 2021. Can you give us additional details on the funding variance and what additional federal funding NYCC is receiving in 2022 compared to 21?
Sure, I'm going to ask Anika to take that question if you could, please.
Great. Thank you so much for the question, Chair. So to clarify, NYCC anticipates receiving a new annual federal capital grant of $700 million. We are rolling $608 million of unspent federal capital funds across 3 of our open grants from 2019, 2020, and 2021. For each federal grant, NYCC has 2 years to commit 90% of the grant and 4 years to fully expend. So in any given fiscal year, we have at least 3 open grants at various stages of drawdown per the federal requirements.
Has NYCC submitted any specific funding requests to the Biden administration?
So as Greg mentioned at the top, most of our funding comes from formula. So our federal operating and capital funds are done in formula, and similar for the Section 8 program as well. But NYCC did join in residents in calling for $40 billion in capital funding for NYCC. These requests were outlined in the letter we signed and drafted with the CCOP back in fall 2021. We also continue to ask for additional operating subsidy, and we ask for our utility savings, as we mentioned, of $53 million.
What's been the impact of the American Rescue Plan on NYCC's programs and budget? And is NYCC tracking how much it has and could expect to receive?
We absolutely are, and that's, again, another great question. So through the American Rescue Plan, we received funds for emergency housing vouchers. Our award was $81.3 million for 5,738 temporary vouchers. That's all that we've received from that bill at the time.
And have all those vouchers been granted?
Granted to NYCC?
Yeah.
Yes, we have an award for all the vouchers, and we are currently working through allocating them to families.
Thank you. In terms of the CARE Act as well, can NYCC provide details on, actually, are there restrictions and guidelines for spending of any of the CARES Act funding?
Sure. So the CARES Act is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, which was signed into law back in March 2020, and it provided about $12 billion nationally for all HUD programs. Through that, back in 2020, NYCC received $150 million of CARES Act public housing operating funding and $37 million in CARES Act Section 8 administrative fees. So this federal funding does have restrictions, but it can generally be used for your daily maintenance and operating related to the program. So Section 8 separately and public housing separately, and then any specifics around your coronavirus response. So for the Section 8 program, they gave a list for what could be eligible. And for the public housing program, it's a little bit more flexible, but in general, you can spend it on day-to-day maintenance and operating, PPE, sanitizing, and anything else that you need to run the public housing program.
Thank you. I commend the capital tracking project that is going to be released. Obviously, we're hungering for a great deal of transparency and understanding. Is there any possibility or thinking around how we track and report federal funding for the public's understanding?
So that's a really great question, and NYCHA does participate in the Comptroller's Checkbook Initiative. We rolled that out in our participation back in 2021. So currently, all of our details, our spending, what we've received, what categories, that is all available currently for public consumption through the Comptroller's website.
Great. We'll look forward to diving into more of that. In terms of going into the rent collections and the impact, you mentioned in the presentation that there have been, declining collection throughout the pandemic. And NYCHA reports a collection rate of only 71% as of December 2021, which is a significant reduction from the 88% of collection in December 2019. What is NYCHA's cumulative rent collection rate for January 2022? And what is the projection of the rates in the new 2022 calendar year?
Sure. So our 2022 budget conservative projects that we will collect around $867 million in tenant rent revenue. And so that on average is a collection of around $72 million per month. And as of January 2022, we did collect $72 million, and our cumulative rate so far is around 71%. So if we can keep that momentum, that can at least help us to meet our targets. But as mentioned, in years past, we've collected upwards of $1 billion. So it's still a significant loss for us.
Have you noticed in terms of in the collections, any particular trends or geographies of certain developments struggling more than others?
I think anecdotally, we do know, we've noticed some trends, and we do track sort of tenants with outstanding receivables by dollar amount, by geography and the like, but we really do realize that a lot of this is just coming from the pandemic. It's certainly not an accident that our rent collection, plummeted in April 2020, and since then has kind of, ebbed and flowed. So I think we do have, if anyone is interested, of course, data by development for rent collection by month, by year, but it's really hard to figure out exactly what it is beyond the pandemic that might be causing the decreases.
Can NYCHA use federal stimulus funds to make up any lost revenue between 20 and 2022?
So the CARES Act funding that we received did help us to offset some of the rent collection losses, but at the same time, we also had increasing expenses related to our actual coronavirus pandemic response. And there is no other stimulus funding that we have received since then.
And in terms of, are NYCHA residents eligible for rental assistance under the New York State rent relief program? And if so, how has NYCHA helped tenants to apply for that assistance?
Great. So with regard to the emergency rental assistance program, NYCHA launched a simple consent-driven process so that our residents could apply. We launched a large-scale communications campaign, which included mailings, phone calls, door knocking, email communications to secure of enrollment from our residents, and we made enhancements to our IT system to ensure that the process was simple and easy for residents to use. As of February 25th, we submitted landlord documents on behalf of 29,033 households, totaling more than $110 million in arrears. We are currently, in terms of the priority that you mentioned for NYCHA residents, so they are eligible, but they are on the lower end of the state's priority list. And from all indications so far, the state has indicated that they have committed all of the emergency rental assistance funds in New York State already.
I absolutely agree with you, Ms. Blundell, who is showing a big thumbs down in terms of deprioritizing and again defunding the needs of our residents. Thank you for the response. In terms of rent hardships, and I'm eager also to get to my colleagues who I know have a ton of questions, and certainly the residents. So I won't continue to take up as much space. I would like to share space with them. Of the 59,811 interim recertification requests submitted over the period of 20 to 2022, how many of those recertifications were approved? Were any denied? And if so, why were they denied?
Sure. So of the 59,811 requests, 32,888 were approved, 25,034 were denied. Interim recertifications are denied because they could be created in error or there was an overdue annual recertification. Alternatively, households were directed to complete their overdue annual or contact their property management office if they believe that that interim request was canceled incorrectly.
Were there any alternatives offered to households whose requests were denied?
Yes, so in those cases, we did tell the households to go back and perhaps complete the overdue annual recertifications. If something was wrong, we encouraged them to contact the property management offices as well. And Greg, I don't know if you want to give any additional context on that process and some of the work that we've been doing.
Sure. So the way we've approached this, because these arrears are so large, we're willing to work with anybody in a way that makes sense. And in this case, if they had an annual due and it resulted in a rent decrease, we would make that retroactive, whether or not it occurred in the annual period or not. In addition, coming out of the pandemic, we had to think about all these accounts that are delinquent. How are we going to think about these? And the first thing we did is that we discontinued. We had about 40,000 active cases, but this is the New York City Housing Authority. So housing is the key word here. We discontinued approximately 40,000 cases. We also said, let's think about those who owe us money in a particular way. And we said, let's not go after anyone who has a pending ERAP application, anyone with a pending interim reexamination, or any senior. By the time we went through that process, kind of winnowing out some of these other accounts, we came down to about 3,200 accounts that we might consider active for future litigation. Now, what's interesting about these accounts reflect either high amounts or long-term delinquencies, like greater than 28 months. These 3,200 accounts, when we factor out some of the other priority and go to priority cases, we have owed us about $50 million. So it's not systemic in the sense that every single resident there is this core group of folks that we are going to target. Now, at the same time, we're going to be offering enhanced payment plans. We're making referrals to family partnerships and others. We are open to HRA solutions and other techniques that we can use to keep families in an apartment, even if they owe us money. So there's not going to be a rush to the door with terminations. And we are opening to sitting down with any family at any place in this process to figure out if there's an enhanced payment plan we could do, or other options that might be open to them rather than go through a termination process.
Thank you, Chair Russ. Were there any terminations of tenancy in 2021 during the pandemic?
From March of 2020 to September of 21, we did not initiate any new terminations.
In terms of arrears and for, I forget the number of Section 8 tenants, clearly we have a huge number, a huge dollar figure that goes through this Section 8 landlords. Are we able to keep track? Do we know how many Section 8 folks are in rental arrears and or evicted?
I think I don't have that number for you, but we could certainly find out. We keep tabs on their status in the program, and we could ask the Section 8 department to do that and provide you with an update on whether there's anybody that's showing landlord terminations and get you that.
Thank you. A good deal of feedback we've received is not only how challenging Section 8 is in terms of recertification, but if we're interested in protecting the residents, of which we are, to maintain their homes, this is a huge blind spot. If we don't know only until they're evicted, I think it's a significant issue.
Oh, I agree with you, and I'd like to talk to the Section 8 staff so I can present the data and give you the sense of what we know. And then if there's other things that we need to do to follow up, we'd be glad to work with you on that.
Great. So before I open it up certainly to my colleagues, and there are so many more questions to ask, and we don't have to have them all certainly today. In terms of the 500,000 ticket repairs, and certainly there's how is NYCHA actively recruiting workers to address these 500,000 open requests?
No, thank you. I'm going to start with a sort of introduction and ask Daniel Sherrod then to pick up on the operating side. As indicated in our prior testimony, we have been trying to build sort of more folks on the ground to do the repair work as well as to do the caretaking work that is so desperately needed. It is a difficult recruitment process. We're in competition not only with other city agencies, but also with other private companies looking for the same skill sets. So for example, with the infrastructure bills that have passed Congress, there's going to be higher demand for trades all across the country, and we'll be competing with that mix. But I do want to give Sherrod a chance to give you a feel for what we're doing in terms of the repair tickets, what we're thinking about, and how we're approaching sort of managing the workforce at the properties overall.
So thank you, Chair. When you think about NYCHA's over 500,000 work orders that we have open, the bulk of those work orders are for those highly coveted skilled trade positions, such as carpenters, plumbers, electricians, and the dying art of plastering. So we are competing with everybody in the tri-state area, really, to get those significant skill sets to NYCHA. So what we've done is try to realign the way we're operating to, as the chair mentioned, our neighborhood model. But one of the best things that'll come out of that is when a resident such as Ms. Blondell or Ms. Torres calls in for a work order, the neighborhood planner will be able to sequence our trades to Ms. Blondell's schedule. So if she says, hey, I'm only available on Thursday between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m., she will work with the neighborhood planner to schedule all of those trades. So for example, go to the soft wall. Well, we know immediately we need a plumber, we need a plasterer, we need a painter. And if it's in the kitchen, more than likely, we're going to need a carpenter. Ms. Blondell will be able to work with her neighborhood planner to schedule all of those trades sequentially to be able to get that work done faster than we have been in the past. So as we're attacking those 500,000 work orders with the limited skill set that we have, we remember that if being more efficient with what we have will begin to turn that corner so our residents can actually benefit from the changes we are making as an agency. But we are competing with everybody else for those same dwindling skilled trades. This is a great opportunity to highlight our own NYCHA Academy as well, because we're trying to produce our own residents to start doing these skilled labor positions so that under our Section 3 program, they can actually get the jobs that come out and be able to service the members of their community.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sherrod. So how much is being invested in those programs so that NYCHA residents can be a part of?
Well, I'll ask our CFO to answer that question because the money is up to her.
So I don't have the exact dollar amount for the NYCHA Academy, but we can get that for you.
Great. Well, we look forward to seeing what the full plan is in terms of full outreach, the scope and scale of the outreach, and certainly the goals of the program over the next years. As we know, many of our residents are underemployed, and this would be a huge benefit across the city. I guess I would like to, I have many more questions, but I would like to open it to my colleagues who are patiently waiting and eagerly awaiting. So Marjorie, I'm sorry. Audrey, I guess if I will pass it over to you and you will manage the line of questioning. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, council members, for your patience. At this time, we'll call on you in the order that you've used the Zoom raise hand function. And any other members who would like to ask questions, please raise your hand and we'll call on you in turn. In the interest of time, we will set the clock to 5 minutes each. First, we will take questions from Councilmember Salamanca, followed by Councilmember Barron.
Time starts now.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great being here. I want to welcome in all the incoming council members. And Chair Russ, is good seeing you there. Chair Russ, I want to express my frustration once again in this new term that I'm in with NYCHA and their finances. The fiscal year 18's budget, I allocated $3 million to NYCHA for layered access for Melrose houses. We are now focusing and we're about to vote on fiscal year 23. You have the money. The supply has not been delivered. Can you once again explain why NYCHA has failed to deliver, even though you have the money on your desk?
Well, I don't actually have it on my desk, council member, but I wish I did. Thank you. But a couple things to think about. One of the things that we have recognized, I've said this before, is the need to create a capital department with a project manager for the kind of money that we're receiving from council. That is going to happen this year. The other thing is I can ask Sean to give you an update. We did send updates on the status of all the funds, I think earlier in this year. But if Sean has an update on where we are with that particular project, we'd be glad to give it. And if not, we can give it to you and give you an idea when that was going to be spent. I don't know, Sean, if you've got that particular site.
Yes, thank you, Greg. And thank you, Councilmember Salamanca, for your question. I think we have started to make progress on that project. The planning and design for the work started last September in 2021. There was a resident meeting earlier this month on March 2nd. And there's a follow-up meeting coming up next Monday, I believe. The project will be in procurement phase through August, at which point we hope to start construction. And that construction for the layered access control and CCTV is expected to extend into 2024. But we are now making progress on the project. I understand your frustration with the previous timelines, and we hope that we can push that forward effectively together.
It's unacceptable. It's unacceptable how you guys operate. You're here talking to us that you need $40 billion from the federal government to fix, to fix all these capital needs. Here you have a council member who has allocated funding in fiscal year 18, and the work still has not been completed. I strongly advise my colleagues, if you want a project completed, do not give money to NYCHA from your capital dollars, because you're going to go through this frustration that I've been going through years. Every fiscal year, I ask the same question and I get the same answer. And it's just extremely frustrating. At one point, I have nothing else to tell my constituents. My next question is, I know I've been working with your office, with Brian Honan, on Stebbins, Hewitt Consolidated, and the issues with the heating. And we know that the issues with the heating is more of the cold air sipping in through the windows. And there's about, I believe, 114 or 140 units in which their windows needs to be replaced. And I know that I'm working with NYCHA on getting these windows replaced. For a temporary fix, what NYCHA is doing is that you're providing a plastic cover on the window seals to keep the cold air from coming in. And it's my understanding that you've done this in other NYCHA developments. Can you tell me how many NYCHA developments are suffering through these same issues and the temporary fix is putting a plastic cover on their windows?
I don't have an answer for that, but it does not surprise me at all. And let's think about what this means. To do the window replacement also means we have to treat the exterior wall. That means we have to take the existing windows out. We have to put a new window in. And while we're up there doing all that on the building, we have to take care of any issues with the facade at the same time. So we do have windows that are in poor condition. In fact, one of the most expensive things in the physical needs assessment is replacing windows. And it's not just the purchase, it's the labor necessary to do it. So we can take a look and see if we have an identifier with respect to the plastic sheeting, but window replacement in other properties that I've done, half of the cost of the exterior repairs, this was a $100 million property, 50 million went to windows. So these are, when you step out of that apartment and you step out to the facade work, you now reach the place where the numbers rapidly climb into the billions. So we'd be glad to talk about what we see in terms of what we have to do at some of these sites, especially those in your district. And we'd be glad to say and give you a sense of what that's going to cost. But I cannot represent to you that we have the money to do wholesale window replacement. I just don't think it's there inside the money that we get on a regular basis.
All right.
And Chair, if I could add too, Council member, we do have a plan to address this, and we were at the development, together a few weeks ago. Within a few days, we were able to get residents information on how they can get short-term relief. But this is not, as the chair stated, this is not an uncommon issue, right? So oftentimes we get complaints about no heat, and we find that the boilers are working okay, but the heat is going out literally going out the window because of this issue. So it is just part of a larger infrastructure story that that we've been talking about.
Yeah. All right. Madam Chair, I know that my time is up. I would love to have a conversation with you about having another hearing one day on NYCHA on funding, that capital funding that the council has allocated to NYCHA, and to really give the members an idea of how we give money, capital dollars to NYCHA. NYCHA has the funding and they still cannot get the job done. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Salamanca. We will absolutely be following up with a hearing on capital expenditures and why they take so long.
Thank you.
And I guess I will just add before we move on to our next colleague, this issue of windows and sequence of work. We have seen in Red Hook windows being pulled out when in fact the contractors didn't have the windows to replace them. And when residents have asked about the window replacement, they said, well, we don't have them. And they said, well, why would you pull out the window as we enter the winter months? And yet no response, and windows come out and residents freeze with a plastic covering. It is just wholly unacceptable. If we don't have the products that we need and the sequencing that's appropriate, it would be like me saying I was going to reno your house with only half of the materials, and good luck. So it's another area that we need some major work in. I'm sorry to Audrey, the next council member.
No worries at all. We will now take questions from Councilmember Barron, followed by Councilmember Stevens.
Time starts now.
Councilmember Salamanca, I could not agree with you more. On the state level, I allocated $4 million to NYCHA, but then I don't know who's more incompetent, the state or NYCHA, because then they go back and forth saying that NYCHA didn't send us the paperwork, that NYCHA says we got it into the Ways and Means Committee, but they didn't send us the money. So we're being bounced back and forth. Who suffers? Our tenants. Our tenants suffer when y'all start shuffling money. We need to get money from the city. We don't get enough from the state. Oh, we don't get enough from the renters. We don't get enough money there. The feds don't give us enough. But when what you have to maximize on that, because our people are hurting. You try being in a cold house, and you try being in a home. I grew up in public housing. I lived on the Lower East Side in the Lillian Walled houses for 30 years. I know NYCHA. And then after I got in office, I know NYCHA and what goes on. We're in a bad situation. Barack Obama and Biden failed us. What they did is they cut the federal budget and gave us Rad and Pat. That came from your Black president. And this present Vice President now, Biden. That's what we got from them. So while they're cutting the federal money and our problems increase, then they give us Rad and Pat. Rad and Pat is failing in many places. They give them the superficial fix-ups. And I can't blame some of our tenants. We fought against it, but they came with it anyway. And they threatened the tenants. They're removing money from Section 9, which is public money, to Section 8, which is private money. So you have to get a new lease. You no longer have a protected public lease. I spoke to lawyers about that. You're less protected with a Section 8 private lease. Why the hell I got to give you a new lease? Because they're changing the money so they can have more control. And watch this. You give them a few years, you're going to be in trouble. They're setting you up with all these new programs. I think it is unconscionable what's happening to our residents in NYCHA. And Chair, you said you and the mayor have the same vision. Well, y'all must have been hallucinating, because you can't have a vision like that and only put 200 and some odd million in and 410 million. This mayor has a $100 billion 10-year capital budget. Let me say that again. A $100 billion 10-year capital plan. You talking about 410 million and you're happy? You take your little happy somewhere else, because they need to put at least $10 billion into that. And then let's make some changes in NYCHA so that it can be managed properly. 200 and some odd million dollars to city funds, and the state is even worse. We have a black head of the assembly, a black head of the Senate, and they allowed Cuomo to cut $400 million out of the capital budget for NYCHA. We have to do better by our people. And I'm looking at all of this stuff that they want to say, well, I have an idea. I have an idea, and we should all get together around this. We should develop a program called REMAP. REMAP. REMAP stands for Residents Empowerment and Management Action Plan. If RAD can manage us, if PAC can manage us, then the residents should be able to manage the place where they live. Let the residents manage. Give the residents the Section 8 money. Give the residents the capital money. And we have Blondell and these other residents here, they're sharp. You think NYCHA is a bunch of uneducated, unskilled people that you can't even get Section 3 jobs for? Get the hell out of here. We have all kinds of talent in NYCHA. You're the problem, not the residents. And Section 3, by law, you're supposed to do 30% of the residents. Well, don't tell me about who has the skills and we're trying to get you to get skills. Well, you've been around for 50,000 years. You should have had a training program for them to get the skills so that they can get the job. I don't have no questions for you. I'm making a statement. City Council, we got to get down on this mayor to put billions. We have $100 billion city budget, 100 capital money. Take care of NYCHA. 400,000. Take care of NYCHA. Thank you. And I'm so happy that you're the chair. We couldn't have a better chairperson than you. I'll be honored to serve with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Barron. You see many of our residents giving you hands up. And as we like to say, word. I'd like to ask a couple of questions in terms of RAD. How many conversions are being planned for 2022? And where are those conversions located?
Hang on, I'll have to. Does anyone on the team have that number? I don't want to misspeak. We do have it. Wait.
I think
Okay.
Sean is trying to talk.
Hold on. So sorry, it just took me a few minutes to find. We currently have 19,700 households that are part of active development projects in the process of resident engagement or pre-development. So those households will be coming on in the coming year. That's in addition to the other households that are already in process, either completed or underway. So the number we have most recently is about 15,500 apartments where we've got either the infrastructure complete or we have the process underway. And I would like to point out something about RAD, if I have the opportunity. The transfer from Section 9 to Section 8 does not make this a private property, not in the sense that we just heard. In fact, the ground lease that we use, it's a ground lease. Nobody is selling anything off here. The ground lease restricts the use of that property and keeps it under the public control of NYCHA. The subsidy, though, is so much more powerful and so much richer that it allows a combination of what the development team brings and the additional income that that property has to raise the kind of money we need to do that work. So resident protections are part of the RAD notice that HUD has issued. We go even beyond that. And the resident engagement process, I'd be glad to share that with you separately because we've really changed how we've done that. And how have we changed it? One, we're engaging a lot earlier with the residents in terms of explaining to them what this process is about, because we understand that the change in subsidy does create a fear or concern. Second, we are partnering with the residents in the selection of the development team. We had that work through Fulton and Chelsea, but the residents themselves get to do their own interviews. They get to do a chance to sort of have their questions answered of the different people who propose how they would invest in their property. And the third thing we have changed is we are making funds available to any resident group that feels like they need outside technical assistance that's not NYCHA. So if we have a tenant group that says, well, your architects told us this and that and the other thing, but we're not so sure. Can we get our own architect to verify that? The answer is yes. You've told us that the financing is going to raise this much money. Can we get a financial advisor to take a look at your pro formas and opine on them? Yes. So this is a different kind of model. And the other thing I'll say that we're open to, and we've been open to this and expressed this in the Preservation Trust Bill, is talking to groups about resident management corporations. The only restriction I would say that we are thinking about a resident management corporation is this: let's give the residents a fully rehabilitated property to manage if that's what they want to do. If you're managing at the same issue we are, it doesn't help. It's like, slipping on a bar of soap in a way in the shower. So we have to give them a property that they can manage to. And while that construction is going on, the resident management corporation, however it chooses to formulate itself, can build up its strength, build up its capacity. And as those buildings finish, we could come up with a way to provide that transition. The other thing to remember is under the RMC rules that HUD has established, that RMC does get operating subsidy if that's what's in the property, and it gets access to other funds as well. That is by law. So we're very open to thinking about places where we've had some residents when we did the outreach for the trust, they raised the same issue that the Councilmember Barron raised about resident management corporations. We're very open to talking about plans to do that. I don't want to give the impression that we're not, but we do want to give the unit and a completed building to the residents.
That'll take a lifetime.
Chair Russ, has the tenants that underwent conversion or that are in the process in the pipeline of undergoing conversion, have they voted to affirm that this is the path that they wanted to go on?
There wasn't a vote at the property, no.
So who unilaterally made that decision and regarded it as a tenant?
Well, that decision is made in conjunction with the physical needs assessment. We actually go in and talk to the residents first. Now, we've had some folks say, no, we don't want to do this right now. We haven't held a formal vote, and we're trying to invest in those properties where folks understand what the transaction is going to look like, what the transition is going to be. And the other thing I'll say, this is why we presented the trust as an option. I think there's a lot of fear and suspicion around the private development teams, even when they bring in nonprofits, even when those teams reflect a different kind of developer. So the trust model is a pure public model. And that public model retains full resident protections and other things as well that would benefit us. So there isn't a vote like I think a chair that you're thinking about, but we have had some sites where they said, hey, we're not ready for this. And we've said, okay, we can come back around and talk about it. And we had some sites that have asked us for it. Can you come in and talk to our tenant association and our residents about what this means? And, we try to work in the most accommodating fashion that we can, given the capital need. I don't know, Brian, did you want to add anything to what I'm saying?
Yeah, Councilmember, it's not a unilateral decision. There is a disposition process that exists. It's called the Federal Section 18 process that requires public meetings, requires the Housing Authority to submit significant documents around, financials, environmental documents, and also around, the plan in order to convert the development. That needs to be approved by HUD before any of these, can move forward. So this is not just NYCHA doing it on its own.
Thank you for the clarification. I suspect what the devil is in the details is what are the thresholds that are defined to meet actual engagement will be the part of the big question. I guess I was curious about how much funding NYCHA allocates to outreach in terms of this process of conversion and engagement?
It is part of the larger community operations budget, which Anika, could you talk about that?
Sure. So I think that the real estate group has a couple of, I think they do work, as Brian said, with the community engagement and partnerships group. So there isn't a specific sort of budget for this particular component. It's a part of their larger budget of engagement.
But I would add, if I could add, we know how much time we're spending at the site, and I would be glad to go back through the engagement processes that we have in progress, and even some of the ones that have been wrapped up, and see if we can come back with an estimate of that. We've actually extended the time that's necessary for the engagement, extended the resident meetings and so forth. But we could give you a reasonable estimate, I think, Chair, based on properties that have been completed and properties are in progress, and any qualifiers, to be clear, so we're not trying to give you some inflated number or something like that.
I'd appreciate that. If it is at all reflective of how TA elections went and that kind of engagement, then it is significantly low and not at all appropriate. So we should have a larger conversation about what specifically that looks like. In terms of conversion for development, I would expect a very robust engagement process, because this is so significant to the development. So I'd look forward to that further conversation.
And we have several key staff people that we could bring to your meeting that talk about how they do engage and how that works and what the timing is. So that we could do in some forum or separately, however you choose, because we have made a lot of changes in the past 2 years as we've learned from things that worked or didn't work. And it is not at all similar to the resident elections, but I'd rather have a staff and you be able to exchange and get the information firsthand.
Great, thank you. And last question, I will pass it on to my colleagues. Does NYCHA monitor the satisfaction of residents who have undergone RAD conversions in any systematic, robust way?
I'm thinking if we've ever done surveys in the manner you described. Do you know if we've done that, Brian?
No, we haven't. It's a good question. Formally, but I can tell you anecdotally, I've never gone to a development that is converted where folks have said, can you please, bring NYCHA back to manage this property?
Brian, it doesn't come out quite like that. Anecdotally, it's like more of the same. It's more of the same. Whether NYCHA or a private company, we're not getting the repairs. Or we get.
So two things I'd like to say. One is, now that you've asked the question, I'm thinking about how we could actually do this, because I think it would be useful to have that piece of information so you could see it. But the second thing is, we do have an asset management component. That's a group of us who are looking at what's happening in that development, looking at things like what is the work order situation? Are they getting stuff done in a timely fashion or not? Do we have any complaints from that development? Because residents do not lose their options to process complaints in various ways. So what I'm going to ask Sean and the real estate staff to do is maybe come back with some ideas about how we could take this sample, because it is an interesting question.
Great, Audrey, I'll pass it back to you to get our colleagues in the conversation.
Great, thank you. We will continue with council member questions. First, Councilmember Stevens, followed by Councilmember Kagan.
Time starts now.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. And just wanted to say my thanks to Chair Alvio. I think you're doing an amazing job, and I want to second what Councilmember Barron said around I can think of no one being a better chair of housing than you. Like I said to you before, I think you lead with a sort of love and compassion that NYCHA needs. And so thank you for your leadership at this time. But I just wanted to like second some of the frustrations from my colleagues and me being a new council member coming in, often just having the same issues of like money that has been allocated by my predecessor that still has not been allocated, and you don't see the improvements. And so even when we talk about the blueprint is one of those things where I feel like NYCHA wants the residents to believe and hope that it's going to do all the things that it was supposed to do, where we had Next Generation before, we had all these other programs that came in and was supposed to save NYCHA and did not do any of those things. So I think that we have to get to a place where we're building trust and building a relationship. And I think some of that comes from the engagement with residents and having true, honest conversations, which I know a lot of residents don't feel that NYCHA does. They don't feel like a lot of those conversations are done with honesty and integrity. So my first question is, how much money, I know Chair asked about RAD, but how much money was actually spent on community engagement with the residents around the blueprint? And how many residents have you met with to engage with them around that process?
I don't have the dollar number, but I think we do have engagement numbers in terms of how we did the outreach. I don't know who might have those on the team, but we could share those if they don't have them at hand.
Okay, and so, and while I guess we get those numbers, I guess we can move on to some of my other questions.
Sure.
In a lot of our NYCHA developments, we have community centers who are in total disarray, just like a lot of the apartments, because when NYCHA was being divested from, so were the community centers. Have we thought about some other systems that we can think about? Because I think it becomes very difficult when you have community centers and community-based organizations that are in competition with residents who also have a lot of issues around mold and leaks and things like that, of maybe having a person who's designated to work and get the community center complaints fixed in a more adequate way, because the way it's working now, it often seems like there's a huge backlog.
I think your assessment is correct. I think one of the problems that we have, since we don't run the programs in the community center, we have been trying to establish reasonable lease arrangements with the providers who are there. And that would include both any repairs that they might want to take responsibility for. You know, you might have a provider that says, hey, I have my own handyman here. He or she could take care of whatever. But we don't have leases. I mean, it seems like such a fundamental thing to think about. You have a facility, but we've been unable to negotiate a master agreement with the departments that are providing support for the providers. And secondarily, we wanted each provider to have a lease so we could define the repairs that we're responsible for, who to contact, and do that in a way that's consistent across the portfolio. We're still open to doing that, and we'd like to do that, because it's just not a comfortable thing having let's say, a good provider who's interested in serving the community be unable to access repairs timely for some reason. And secondly, I've had a lot of resident leaders say, look, I'm not particularly happy with the services that are in the center now. What do we do to change that? And one of the things that we would like to do is incorporate the tenant associations in the selection of the provider mix as well. And we'd like, again, that requires a little bit of administrative structure with the agencies that are providing the funding for the services, and then the provider itself. But we'd be open to doing that to try to get rid of that confusion or concern.
And council member, if I can add, we do have a dedicated staffer that oversees repairs on community centers. I can text you his name and
Thanks,
contact
Mike.
information, and and he is charged with starting any projects that are behind.
Time expired.
Thank you. We'll now take questions from Councilmember Kagan, followed by Councilmember Sanchez.
Time starts now.
First of all, thank you for this opportunity. I would like to praise Chair of Public Housing Committee, my colleague, Councilwoman Alexa Vilas, and I completely agree with my colleagues and I share their frustration. I represent Coney Island and Marlborough houses. Every time I go to several developments, visiting some apartments, it feels like war is not in the Ukraine, but war is in Coney Island, or war is like, I'm visiting graves and houses, like just war there, you know, like I visit for 7 months, we have development for 7 months. We have development called Surfside Gardens without cooking gas. And every time explanation, like it's a very complicated building. It's we need to provide safety. I understand, but for 7 months, if you give to any private company half of the amount of money, it will be done in 1 week, I guarantee you. But for 7 months, excuses. And when I'm asking for a timeline, there is no answer, no timeline. We cannot provide the councilman timeline because it could be 2 months, could be 3 months, could be end of the year. Meanwhile, again, for 7 months, if you live in an apartment without cooking gas in Surfside Gardens, we're talking about human beings. Some apartments you cannot even come inside. I went to one apartment. It looked like, again, like someone bombed this apartment, you know. I was shocked, you know. And like after I complained, that's another thing I don't understand. You're talking about money. Oh, we don't have money from federal government. We don't have money from city. We don't have money from state. Meanwhile, when you are getting all the money in the world, I will give you example. Haber houses in Coney Island. For 7 years, all money were received for boilers. We are still construction over there, still connecting these boilers to Haber houses in Coney Island for 7 years. And I was promised numerous times, no, we will finish by the end of 2021. It still continues. So I strongly believe the problem is not money. The problem is not money. The problem is a complete lack of accountability. This Thursday, I'm introducing the legislation. I know that city has almost no oversight. So besides these public hearings, so it will be resolution asking New York State and federal government to make someone accountable in nature, including managers of the buildings, Sometimes tenants can get any kind of reaction from anybody, only when council member, assembly person, state senator, congressman, sending email or calling nature. Is it okay? Any timeline to respond to complaints to 718, 707, 7771. Today I talked to the resident. He complained 5 times in 4 days about lack of hot water. After I sent the mail, today someone visited his apartment and started to do repairs. Is it okay? Does it have anything to do with money? No. It's a lack of responsibility. Nobody cares. Nobody even responds like, there is no timeline. There is no any kind of like mandatory timeline to respond to people's complaints. Like they don't exist. You're talking about money, I'll give you the money. Could you check vendors policy in nature, contractors policy in nature? Anybody who replacing these broken locks in every door, they replace locks for 3 months, the next morning this lock is again broken. So if you check just vendors and contractors policy inside nature, you will find millions and millions of dollars, I guarantee you. So I don't have questions. My only request is look at accountability. Like, look how you treat tenants. Look how you respond to tenants' complaints. It has nothing to do with money. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Kagan.
Do we have an update on gas by any chance? If one of the team members wants to go, do we have an update?
Greg, this is Sean. I can give a brief update on the gas. So I know most recently there has been a gas issue at Surfside due to a pressure test in the building. I think last week National Grid has restored the gas, and NYCC plumbers are working on one of the remaining lines that wasn't corrected. We're now awaiting the ACP5 and the permit to get the gas fully moving. The broader project that's happening at Surfside around the boilers, we are doing a number of different design activities. A walkthrough and other activities were completed, and there's an ongoing asbestos investigation, but we are kind of pushing forward with the capital projects work there. The asbestos abatement is supposed to start at the end of March, right? And then we'd move on to the broader activities.
Council member, if you'd like to come on site and walk through with the technical people, we'd be glad to show you what we're up against.
Please, Councilmember Kagan.
Yes, anytime
Sure.
I'm ready to go there. I was there many times, Surfside Gardens. Residents are suffering for 7 months. That's besides unworking elevators, that's besides mice and roaches, that's besides, like I said, like a bump was there from the airplane. But cooking gas for 7 months, people are suffering, nobody cares, nobody.
Well, we can give you the timeline on the cooking gas replacement so that you can see it.
For 7 months, how many, for how long? During the entire winter, people did not have cooking gas, and it continues, and no timeline so far.
Well, we have all the lines restored but one, and I will just add only one other comment. The gas piping is failing because of the same reason that the water and the heat pipes are failing. They cannot pass the pressure test necessary for the utility to turn the gas back on. Now, you could have a leak in one apartment or behind one panel of wall. And when the utility shuts that down and then wants you to restart with the pressure test, the pipes won't pass. We've had buildings where not just the riser where the leak was had to be replaced, but the entire building had to be repiped. That takes a lot of time. The other unfortunate thing about gas is it's wrapped in asbestos. Asbestos has very specific remediation requirements. That adds time. I'm not saying that's the only reason, because I don't want to I'm not trying to dismiss your concern or what you're seeing, but we'd be glad to go through this with you a little bit and see some of this, and then, you can judge for yourself. But we'll get you time to go through these.
I'm ready to go now, anytime, let me know. Anytime.
Okay, we'll have Brian circle back and get some time with you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Kagan. Your anger is certainly well placed, as our residents are suffering over long periods of protracted time. 7 months is too damn long. I guess I want to highlight the fact that the recurring theme here is certainly NYCHA has a significant amount of capital sitting somewhere that is not being expended expeditiously. How can we get assurances that we will fix this issue and get the money moving to where it needs to go?
Sean. I think, Audrey, I think Sean is on mute. Yep.
Yes, apologies, I've just gotten unmuted. Councilmember, thank you very much for the question. While I'm new to the role, that's not an excuse, and we're going to be making significant improvements this year to try to address these challenges, more so than we've been able to in the past years. A number of areas were mentioned in the testimony by Chair Russ around how we can work with city partners to streamline approval processes, how we can make our vendor management more strategic so that we can get a higher performance, both in terms of timelines and quality. And we're doing a lot of work internally on our processes and systems and how we strengthen our project controls and our project management approach. So we're very much hoping through those efforts as part of the transformation plan and as part of my role in the Asset and Capital Management Division and reorganizing the way we work here, that we'll be able to make significant improvements, during the year and in the coming years to be able to expedite how we can utilize the city funding that's allocated to us.
I do want to emphasize, thanks, Sean, that we are, all funds considered, we're spending $60 to $70 million a month currently. What I would say is that the dissatisfaction with the council funding is real, and we hear it, and we are going to fix this. I'm not going to go through a session next year with the same question. And we're going to have a project management system that doesn't exist now and really never has in the fullness that we need to answer your questions about specific funding. And I'll be candid, this has really been difficult, and it's unsatisfactory. I don't like having the relationship where you don't feel that you know or understand what's happening with this money. You have a right to that. And so do the residents who are expecting us to do something. So one of the reasons we brought Sean in is we actually are going to deconstruct that whole department. We're kind of going to take it apart and rebuild it. And when we're done with this, if you've got money into a particular property or community center, there's going to be a way to contact someone and say, hey, what the heck is going on? And in addition, the tracker is going to help, because I think that's incredibly important, to be able to randomly take a look at something maybe without giving us a call. And I think over time we can actually corral this thing and come up with a set of reasonable solutions. So I know this is not, it's what I think we can do, and I think we can do the bulk of it this year.
Great, thank you, Chair Russ. We'll continue the conversation and monitoring closely. My last understanding in terms of capital expenditure was NYCHA was expending only 6% of city capital dollars. That's just unacceptable. So I look forward to more progress.
Yeah, no, we do too. And we have a bunch of ways I think we're going to be able to push that number up, but it's not right. So I can't argue that at all, nor would attempt to.
Thank you. We'll now take questions from Councilmember Sanchez, followed by Councilmember Riley.
Time starts now.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you, Chair Aviles, for chairing this hearing and for your leadership on NYCHA and public housing. Chair Russ and the NYCHA team, it's good to see you again. I mean, I first want to start by just echoing frustrations, right, that my colleagues have voiced already and that you just addressed, and they're sort of shared across the board, right? My first question is, with respect to the transformation plan, we see in the mayor's management report that there has been a 52% increase in the amount of time that it's taking NYCHA to resolve non-emergency repairs. And so first off, to just acknowledge the tremendous body of work that has happened over the past few years, NYCHA 2.0, the blueprint, the transformation plan, working with HUD, all of this work that you're doing to turn the authority around. You're sort of building, rebuilding a broken plane while you fly it, right? Understanding that. But, to the point that residents are living this in real time and the frustrations run deep, when can we start to expect to see some of the changes that, will come from the transformation plan, the work order streamlining, and et cetera?
I think Greg is trying to unmute.
Thanks. I may not be the only person to answer this. So that is frustrating, isn't it, when you can't get that button to do that thing? We have two big reforms. The work order reform is in two parts. The first part is bringing in additional skilled trade staff, but not placing them up at the borough level, placing them down in the neighborhood level. And this has been one of the sticking points in having access to those trades in a way that sort of is more localized. So that's one piece of it. But the other piece is this work order change, where we're going to work orders and tasks, and we're scheduling all the tasks at once. And that is going to change, I hope, both the timeliness and the responsiveness that residents could actually see as part of that. Now, we started late last year. Most of this is focused on the skilled trades, but the work order reforms itself could potentially benefit other work orders as well. And I think the other thing that's happening is the changes in the janitorial. Now, That's the trash pickup. Some of that is making sure that the compactors are working. That's the cleanliness of the buildings. Some of these things. When NYCHA rolled out the alternative work schedule, I couldn't find a single resident that thought it was a good idea. So we've jettisoned it. And we are going to be doing significant reforms there as well. And the last thing I would say is that we are rebuilding the institution. I can't say that in the time I've been doing this kind of work, we've had an institution with so many multiple problems. I've had some pretty tough ones, but I feel like every time we touch something, we've got to rebalance how we work on the inside. That transformation plan covers every aspect, it's the properties, it's the neighborhoods, it's even the governance structure that has to be retooled. So in terms of seeing results, I'm hopeful that by the end of this year, we'll see some results on the work order side. In terms of the reorganization and the recommitment of people. I mean, I think one of the things, there's two groups of people that get incredibly discouraged and frustrated. The residents themselves and the employees that are valued employees who can't seem to get their arms around the work that we have. And part of that is us, and that's what we're committed to changing. Go ahead, Brian.
Sure. And Councilmember, can I also add, for the first 5 months of 2021, non-emergency work orders were suspended due to COVID. So we weren't going into people's apartments unless it was an emergency. We were scheduling that work, but not, there were a lot of people who did not want folks inside their apartments for understandable reasons.
Thank you so much. I have one more question if the chair would allow me. And it's about the Public Housing Trust Preservation Trust. So understanding NYCHA's 2.0 plan says that you want to convert 62,000 units via Pact and RAD, and then there's a number of units that would be addressed through Build to Preserve and Transfer to Preserve. That still leaves 110,000 units unaddressed, to which you subsequently, been talking about the Public Housing Preservation Trust. So I would just love to have in this space, in this hearing, and sort of the record, for the public's benefit, how is it that the Public Housing Preservation Trust would bring in more money? Are we talking about more Section 8 to Section 9 voucher conversions? Are we talking about different funding streams, more access to capital and loans? Like, what is the magic behind the preservation trust? And why should we?
Right. No. Well, council member, that's an excellent question. And one of the answer is, so we designed the idea of the trust to fit into the current federal legislation. In other words, when you pull apart the 1937 Housing Act, there's certain things you can do inside the act to try and raise the money at the property, and converting from 9 to 8 is one of them. Now, why does that even happen? That's because the Section 9 money is based on what I'll call an internal formula for what the HUD and others think it should cost to run public housing. Section 8 is based on the market, and out of the gate, it's worth, yes, sir. It's worth $650 a month more per unit for every unit that's moved over. That $650 a month can be used to, say, do bond financing, just based on the income alone that could be raised. Now, when you do that, there's a set of underlying requirements in that trust bill. First, I mentioned the ground lease earlier in the conversation. The ground lease is actually a deed restriction. That lease exists and functions as one. And what is in that ground lease beside, oh, it's this parcel bounded by this parcel? It's the income you can serve. You cannot serve anybody higher than what we're currently serving with public housing. You cannot do certain things in that ground lease. There's resident protections written into the ground lease itself. So the land itself becomes part of the protection. Then the ground lease is between NYCHA and the trust both of whom are public entities. The trust would be a benefit corporation, just like NYCHA, and would contract back to NYCHA or the revamped NYCHA or an RMC even for services. So this was designed to use the federal laws as written. There's no new legislation that has to be passed. We trigger what's called these we trigger these vouchers, the Section 8, simply by having a ground lease executed with the Preservation Trust Board. So we tried to say, okay, what does the law say now? How do we access the most money we can? And then how do we leverage that money to raise the most money we can for the property? And that's the path. That's the path in the federal legislation that's open to us.
And if I could add to, council member, I don't think there's a magic here. I think we're turning on a federal spigot that currently exists to bring in additional funding. We're doing that with the tenant protection vouchers, which are worth $650 more per unit per month. That also gives us the opportunity to find other funding opportunities to invest in the buildings. We are also doing that with a fully public agency, a newly created public benefit corporation with a publicly appointed board and a public workforce. In addition, tenants retain all of their current rights. The rights literally were copied and pasted into the legislation. And the last thing that's really important, and something that we've talked a lot about at this hearing, is we're looking to address the capital spending, right? By allowing us procurement relief, we will be able to hire better contractors, because oftentimes I hear people say, even when NYCHA has money, they hire vendors who are not of quality. Well, this will address that as well. And we'll be able to use procurement methods that allow us to do the work faster. So if we achieve those three goals, it will be literally transformational and allow us, to have a new day in public housing in New York.
We see you, Councilmember Barron. I'd like to ask my colleagues for a moment of grace to allow Assembly Member Harvey Epstein into the conversation since he has to go back. But I want to thank Councilmember also Riley, who joined us here. So, Assembly Member Epstein. You may need to be unmuted, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair Aviles, and thank you for holding this hearing. I really appreciate it. And I don't want to interrupt. I do need to get over to the floor because your speaker is now on the floor of the Assembly chambers. I didn't know she was up here in Albany, but I'm coming in to testify and in support of really having better oversight over what we're doing. Just so you all know, the Assembly and Senate has been pushing for additional capital and operating funds for NYCHA. We know it requires all levels of government, the city, the state, and the federal government to come together. We are pushing for a $3.4 billion infusion of capital and $2.8 billion infusion of operating money, working with residents to preserve public housing to move forward in that direction. And I know you're talking a lot about the trust. I know Councilmember Sanchez just raised the issue of the trust, and there's some real concerns that I have around the trust, especially around the role of resident leaders in that trust, the opportunities that they have, the ability that they'll have to have real oversight and support. There's time after time again that, I know the Chair Russ and I have talked about this numerous times over the past few years, that I think where the trust is they have not done sufficient community engagement. They have not engaged us in a really comprehensive approach. And if they want better authority to deal with their contracting, let's just do that. Let's let them move forward on better procurement rules. We want them to hire better contractors. We want them to do that. And we want them to get the resources. But I think the city and the state really need to have a comprehensive plan to deal with public housing. And I don't think the trust is that plan. And this is not a plan that I think, while I support that they're trying to work hard at this, I don't think it's a well thought out enough plan. I don't think this plan has enough protections for existing residents. I don't think it has enough protections for potential of if they're failing to meet their deadlines to the lenders. I think with the it's potentially billions of dollars for people who are doing these real estate transactions. That's it's really impacting that there are these for-profit entities who are going to help us do this bonding authority. I think there's so much that's deeply problematic that I would encourage the council to stand with us and not support going forward with the trust, and really requiring NYCHA to do deeply meaningful community engagement with us and the residents together to create a plan that we can all work on. As people know, I'm opposed to the trust right now, and I hope that the council, my city council, will stand with us in dealing with that until we collectively find a plan that works for us, our state and city legislature, and as well as the residents who are the leaders of our NYCHA developments. I have 13 NYCHA developments, thousands and thousands of residents. I will stand with them. They are vocally opposed to the trust as is, and I will continue to do that until they and we come to terms with something that we can stand with and believe in. I don't think it's rad. I don't think that's appropriate either, but it's fundamentally the trust is not gonna fix the problems that we see. And Charles, I see you. We miss you up here, but we're glad you're down there fighting the good fight. And thank you for letting me join you for your hearing. And Chair Aviles, thank you for your leadership on this issue.
So, Assemblyman, thanks so much, and thank you for your advocacy around, always around public housing and always putting public housing first. Let's also just remember that part of the large reason that we're in the mess that we are in at NYCHA is because the state walked away from public housing in 1998, totally abandoned the 16 developments that they built and left NYCHA with the tab to run it. Yes, we would love if you're able to successfully get $3.4 billion in capital funding, that would be welcome. It is not clearly enough, though. It is 1 year. We need $40 billion in funding. A 1 year infusion would be great, but it's clearly not enough. Also, just remember the source of that funding. The funding source that you get on the state level and the city level is bonded money. This is how government raises money, right? Government doesn't save up money and then give it out, as a discretionary funds, right? So we're looking to do something here that is not unusual, that is no different than any other large capital project is funded. We're looking to raise money the same way, using tried and true government practices to do that, with a fully public board, a fully public workforce, and also tenant protections that are in place. Lastly, the thing I want to say is procurement without significant funding will allow us to do projects faster, but we won't have the funding in order to do them. So yes, I want to make sure that we have to do both on the same track. I welcome continuing, having conversations with you, your colleagues in Albany. I think it would be a tremendous waste of opportunity if we let this session go by without addressing NYCHA's needs. And I know together we can get there.
Thank you so much.
Chair, I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to go back and forth. Brian and I can do this for hours, but I really want to thank you. And please, if there are questions members of the council have, I'm happy to talk to them offline. But I really hope that we continue our collaboration, and work together as we move these issues forward.
Can I ask one point of clarification? When we say public board, do we mean a democratically elected board or a board that is appointed by an individual?
It comes, but it's a great question, because NYCHA right now currently has 3 resident board members on the board. And one of the complaints that we hear from residents is, yes, they are residents and are on the board, but we don't feel like they represent us. So in the legislation, at the request of residents, what we did is we put resident members who are nominated by the CCOM, the resident leadership. And those, the ones who are nominated by the CCOP, those are the ones who could be selected to be on the board. So these are choices from residents to represent residents.
But Brian, none of those residents are required to be blueprint residents. So if you are in a blueprint development, the CCOP
that would be up to the resident leadership. So if they wanted to, right, if they wanted to nominate somebody who lived in a development that was slated to be converted under the trust, yes. And again, it wouldn't be NYCHA's choice. That would be up to the residents.
Well, we'll certainly have more to talk about resident engagement and what a democratic process really looks like for residents. So thank you for answering the question. I will turn it back over to Audrey to continue with our colleagues. Thank you, Assemblymember Harvey Epstein.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now take questions from Councilmember Riley, followed by Councilmember Ressler.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Chair Villas, and thank you to the panel for your discussion and presentation. I have 4 quick questions about 4 developments in my district: Boston Secor, Edenwall, Eastchester Gardens, and Gun Hill. With Boston Secor, not Boston Secor, Eastchester Gardens. With Eastchester Gardens, for the past few months, and I want to just thank Brian Honan. He has been very, very, very responsive to me every single time I have messaged him. But there's a gassing and hot water issue in Eastchester. To my knowledge, the TA president, Keith Ramsey, has told me that there are 4 boilers on site and one of the boilers aren't working. So they're running off of 3 boilers. So I want to know if there's an update on fixing the boiler. That's 1. 2, the PAC program is coming to Edenwall. Edenwall is the second largest NYCHA development in New York City. I know that there has been outreach to the community. I believe about 2 weeks ago, you guys had a meeting over here. I want to know if there's going to be any more outreach. Are you doing robocalls? Are you going to partner with my office to kind of relay the message to the residents? Because I don't believe that they're cognizant about this plan that's going to be happening. Number 3, back again to Eastchester Gardens. Eastchester Gardens received money a few years ago. I believe my predecessor and the past mayor gave money for the community center to be upgraded. I just want to know when those renovations will start and what is the projected end date. And last but not least, Brian, I don't know if you remember a few weeks ago, or probably a month ago, I gave you a call about Gun Hill Susan Wagner Daycare. There was a shooting inside the daycare, and the students were at the daycare at the time. The bullets went through the daycare in the room, and there were 3 to 4-year-olds in that room. The teachers, the parents, and many people in the community are scared. I can't believe I'm asking this, but I know I spoke about bulletproof glass. Is it still possible that NYCHA could think about putting bulletproof glass at that center? And those are the 4 questions I have. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks so much, Council Member, and I really appreciate it and always appreciate the partnership. We will have the heating team give us a full report on Edenwall, and it can get you that by the end of the day.
Eastchester, right?
Eastchester. I'm sorry, Eastchester. I'm sorry. And I also know that Mr. Ramsey, we actually put a new project director on the Eastchester project, and Mr. Ramsey and the capital team are in regular contact. We are expected to start construction on that project this year. So it is, really, it's really exciting to finally get some investment into that.
And for clarification, Brian, is that the boiler project or is that
That's the community center project.
Right.
And but I'll get you the information on the heating. On Edenwall, Walter McNeil, the TA president there, has worked really closely with us, as well as the residents across the street at Baychester, who are very happy with the conversion at that development. We would be happy to meet with you and his board to talk about, ways to engage now that the weather is getting better. Now that the city's opening up, we can do more in-person engagement. And love to do that. I mean, Edenwall is the largest development in the Bronx. In order to do proper engagement, you really need, to do the in-person, and, happy to work with you on a plan on that. Yeah.
And the Gun Hill Daycare.
Yeah, Gun Hill Daycare, the day after you called me, we were able to get the glass fixed, but we need to now work on the bulletproof glass. Now that Daniel Sherrod has joined us, was right around the time of his transition, I will raise it to him, and then we'll come back to you on that as well.
Thank you. And just one more thing, Brian, back to Edenwall. I know you guys are converting with the PAC program, but this summer, I know we talked about the backboards in Granada. So can we please revisit that because the summer's approaching?
Yep. And in fact, there is a group that has done work in Councilmember Keegan's district in renovating courts. We put Edenwall on their list. It's called Peace Court. And Edenwall will look to do 2 of the courts at Edenwall. We have them on the list, so I'll come to you with a plan on that soon too as well. I didn't forget that. Okay.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Chair Russ. Thank you,
Sure.
Chair Russ.
Thank you, council member.
Thank you. We'll now take questions from Councilmember Ressler.
Time starts now.
Great. Well, firstly, let me congratulate our chair and my friend, Alexa Viles. I am thrilled that you are chairing this committee, representing Red Hook and just being a champion for public housing residents across the city. I know that I don't think the New Yorkers who need leadership most, who need advocacy most, are our residents in public housing, and we are really fortunate to have you at the helm. So I really just want to thank you. And I want to thank the team from NYCHA for joining us. As my friend from the Bronx just said, Brian Honan manages to respond to every single text message and phone call from every elected official and tenant leader. I don't know how he knows everybody and is on top of everything, but we appreciate you, Brian, for how hard you hustle and grind for us and for our communities. And I had the chance to have the chief operating officer out to Gowanus recently, and so I want to thank Mr. Sherrod, and I want to thank Chairman Russ for their attention to the developments in my district. I'm proud to represent 7 NYCHA developments, but I am angry about the conditions. And I'll tell you, in Gowanus just this year, we've had multiple water outages, multiple heat outages, fires. I mean, it's like, it's just not okay. And appreciate the team being responsive and helpful, but the conditions are totally unacceptable. So, from my vantage point as a council member, and as we have our budget hearing today, you can count on me to advocate and push with everything I've got for more city, state, and federal resources. We need all the help we can possibly get, and we're going to hold you all to account to actually make the improvements that our tenants need and deserve. The first question I just wanted to ask is, for me, the primary goal is to get as much money from Washington as possible. The least preferable option is the RAD Impact program, and the trust, in my opinion, has issues, and we need to work on it and improve it. And if it's going to make its way through Albany, there's some modifications to be had, but it's better than RAD Impact. Why are we continuing to close on RAD Impact deals and privatize our developments instead of putting your energy into the trust?
So this is an excellent question, and there's a couple of reasons that I want to share. The first is that even with the power that the trust brings to funding, we've talked about the amount of money that we could access. We still need additional sources of funding. And when we rolled the trust idea out, we kept RAD Impact so that between the two, you could do 174,000 units. You would eventually address the whole portfolio. Now, the other thing is, even though, I understand folks look at the RAD thing and think, well, I don't know if I like this private element or not. This looks shaky to me or whatever. And those folks do bring money to this deal. They bring an investment opportunity, and they also are operating on top of the ground lease I mentioned. I can't stress enough.
I hear you.
Yeah, to say that, yes, there is a private manager. Some of these folks are working with nonprofits to do services, not everybody. And I don't want to paint a picture that it's all just completely rosy. It's tough to do this work. So between the two, we have enough capital raised to address every single apartment. And we didn't want to sort of abandon this other path, the 62,000, because you know, we have in hand. That's what we got out of you know, as the council member pointed out, from President Obama. That's a path that's known. That's a path that already includes, even though a lot of folks disagree when we say this, already includes a full set of resident protections. The trust is even more so because those are baked into the state law. So between the two, we figured we could raise enough money to really,
with all due respect,
you know.
I just tight on time, so I just want to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
I just want to say, I think you'll have a better opportunity to build goodwill with open-minded leaders by slowing down rat and pack, ceasing new conversions, and putting your energy and effort into the trust. I think that is a better approach. Our district includes Wyckoff and Gowanus, so the resources there are of utmost importance, and I am incredibly eager to see the work begin immediately. The last thing I just wanted to ask as time expires very briefly is with the resources allocated to Wyckoff and the renovations that are happening there, is NYCHA prepared to take your previous proposal for a 50-50 development there officially off the table?
I have to think about that.
Strong.
Yeah, no, I know. I think
that wasn't baked enough, obviously, into the question.
Yeah, no, you know what? The repairs are, I believe, just kitchen and bathroom work. But I would be open to discussing other ways to raise money there other than the one that we originally put forward.
I look forward to having that conversation. I know that.
Yeah, I know that. I wish I could just say, yeah.
Still be there with me.
No, I will. And because there's ways to think about what happens at a property. And I'd like to roll out what the various options might be so you could see for yourself. And then we could decide maybe what makes sense for those sites, because we're so thankful for the money that is coming in for those key, but it doesn't do the whole building.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're going to have to raise that balance some way, and let's show you those options from a financial perspective and see what the appetite is. How's that?
I look forward to it. I appreciate your openness. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Chair Aviles.
Thanks so much. If any other council members have questions, please use the Zoom raise hand function now. Otherwise, we will turn back to the chair. Chair Aviles?
I think we had Councilmember Brewer had a question, but maybe she stepped away. Actually, I would love to move into the public if we could have several of our colleagues, our public residents, ask questions. That would be great. Oh, Councilmember Burrow, would you like to ask a question? You had your hand raised. We have to unmute Councilmember Burrow, and then we'll move into the residents. Thank you for your patience, everyone.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have a few questions. On a big look, the issue of community centers, you talked about the repairs. But the other question I have is, in so many community centers, we're trying to make sure that young people have opportunities. They're closed in the evenings, they're closed on weekends, and there's no money to keep them open. So again, this is a silo thing. DYCD on one side, NYCHA on the other side. And I want to know, just, I've got 3 or 4 quick questions. Is there any thought on something bigger? I'm always thinking a little bit on the bigger side, that keeping these centers open. Mine are all closed on the weekends. I have a lot of developments. I know NYCHA, I don't know, 30, 40 years. So what is the discussion, if any, about trying to open these centers up? It would have to be a citywide effort. Any suggestions?
So, Councilmember, we do have some. It is development by development and center by center. There are some centers that are open on Saturdays.
I know.
It should be universal. And, happy to work with you and DUSD on trying to make that happen. To us, centers that are open, more than they're closed, works better for residents, works better for the community, and we're all in favor of.
Right, but you have to say something and not just, I'm just saying, I'm all over these different budget hearings saying we have to do business differently, and it's very hard to get anybody to think that way. So community centers, you shouldn't have to think, is it open? You should just know that it's open. And I really want to make that a big quest. Number two.
And also too, Councilmember, I just want you to know there's $2.3 million that's currently in place for extended hours in community centers. So,
okay.
So there is funding there.
I know, but it's not enough. I need to know what would it take? What would it take to have them open in the evenings and on the weekends, those that are in the developments? And all the settlement houses really, really want this. Okay, number two, there are a lot of commercial spaces. Maybe you talked about this, I'm on other Zoom too, that are empty and in bad repair. Now, it doesn't change the bottom line of NYCHA, but it is depressing for the community and the residents. So what are we doing about a wholesale attempt to open up and renovate the commercial spaces? Do you have a database? I mean, I know unfortunately, I know all of Manhattan. I can tell you every single commercial center and space that is not open at NYCHA, 60 Madison, et cetera, et cetera. So is there any hope of focus on commercial spaces?
So I think two things, we do have a full inventory of all of our spaces and the needs, in the spaces, and we can happy to work with you and share some of that information. The other thing is we worked with Assemblymember Joyner on legislation in Albany that would provide tax credits to local businesses or nonprofits who wish to invest in public housing to renovate these spaces. This has already worked in upstate housing authorities where, local MWBE or nonprofits are able to come in using state tax credits to renovate the spaces and then start, businesses, especially businesses that are, really important to the communities. That is an Assemblymember Joyner bill, and I believe Senator Bailey has it in the Senate. We fully support that and helped to write that legislation as well.
Okay, I will be glad to follow up because there are a lot of spaces. Same thing with vacancies of apartments, 241 West 101st Street as an example. 2 years ago, there was a fire. It's actually managed by Kraus. Nothing's been fixed up. I just went to a fire in Amsterdam Houses. I don't know how long it'll take to get that apartment. How are we dealing with this? You have an empty apartment. I know it's money, but isn't that make sense to have it renovated so that families can move in? Is there like a time frame on fixing up apartments that have had a fire?
Yes, council member, I'm going to answer if I could. I couldn't get off of mute, but I think we need a master citywide plan for your community centers. We need an
I agree.
MOU,
I agree.
we need an MOU, we need a relationship with the two funding agencies. We need leases with the providers that would spell out the terms of that lease, including the hours of operation, things like that. So that's one thing. Brian answered the question on inventory. I'm going to ask Sherrod to speak to vacancies because yes, we do try to turn those with some diligence. We had a fire recently where we're starting to clean up, but I'm going to ask him if he could speak to that.
So we're working on a comprehensive plan to work through all of our vacancies right now. But in particular, we actually are developing a fire response protocol for our units to actually have a fire. So for example, our most recent fire in Baruchin, the fire was on Friday. If you walk through Baruchin today, it looks like the fire never happened on the inside. So we are taking that experiences and that data that we have now and creating a comprehensive wide plan so that when a tragedy happens, such as a fire, we can get in, make the repairs immediately, and then put that unit back on the rolls for rental. So we are simultaneously working through a comprehensive vacancy program and a more comprehensive fire management program as well.
Okay, because we have one on Amsterdam that I was there when it happened, and then
I
241
just
West
wrote the
101
note to
First
find
Street.
out.
Thank you. Okay, it's
I'm gonna
fifth
follow up
floor.
on both of those.
I can give you the
Fifth
address.
floor.
Fifth floor. Fifth floor.
Thank
I'll
you.
send you the address. Okay, I have. But it would be great to have, because I can't stand to see vacant apartments with all the need. And then the commercial spaces, I'll look at the at the state legislation, but it's just really depressing to see these spaces sitting there. So, all right. Then the other issue, just the trades. I think it's great what you're doing. I heard as much as you could about the reordering and so on. But the trouble is, trades don't want to apply to NYCHA. So even if you have the best system, why do you think that trades who have any quality in their blood are going to go to NYCHA? Because they say they don't get paid on time and blah, blah, blah. How are you going to change that stuff that only the bad ones, I hate to say it, apply? That's my impression anyway. How are you going to do that?
So our trades are excellent gentlemen and women that do tremendous work for our residents. One of the things that I hear anecdotally is that people don't understand the total NYCHA compensation package. So their hourly rate may be lower than what they see at another job, but that other job does not provide the comprehensive benefits that NYCHA provides. So they make that decision based on the hourly rate instead of the in total NYCHA package. So working with our union partners and working with our current team members, we're trying to get that message out that NYCHA is actually a wonderful employer to work for. But more importantly, the trades that we have, they put out a tremendous work product, and we can't be more proud of the work that they're doing. And they're constantly improving because their goal is to serve our residents. So we're trying to make sure that that message gets out to anybody that apply for NYCHA so that they can be part of this wonderful team.
Okay, I don't mind. I think you do a great job, sir, but when it's not as great as you think. I'm just saying the skilled trades, there's lots of great skilled trade folks, but the ones these are not the NYCHA employees. I'm talking about the people
Oh,
who
you're talking
apply.
contractors. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not talking about, your guys are fine. I'm sorry, I
Okay.
wasn't clear. I'm talking about the people who apply, who are outside contractors. When I say skilled trades, that's what I mean. I apologize. No, I'm talking about the people who are the contractors. They're the problem, in my opinion. And
Okay.
it's
And our newly established quarterly assurance team, that is a derivative of the 2019 HUD agreement, is starting to weed out all of those terrible contractors by looking at the quality of their work. And when we find issues, if they're not up to snuff, we're going through the process of removing their ability to contract with us so we can get those better contractors to work for our residents, because that's what our residents want, and more importantly, that's what they deserve.
Okay, I agree. Just hopefully there'll be somebody left by the time you weeded out everybody else.
Yeah, no, council member, we hear you on that, because we're also changing the vendor review that we do to look at past practices. And the other thing that we have that we've never had before, to Sharad's point, is we now have a quality assurance team and we have a compliance department, both of which are capable of validating whether work is done correctly, whether it was done within, those kinds of things we didn't have till the agreement. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get vendors who actually deliver more service and quality service as well, because we now have the ability to check in a way that.
All right, I hear you. I just hope you check with the residents, because they know better.
No, that's
than anybody.
that's what I mean. Yeah, that's part of the process, because believe me, I have not met a resident yet that won't tell us about the quality or not of the work.
And they have a lot to say. And then just finally on the RAD versus the blueprint versus everything. Nobody, I think I'm the only council member who sat through, along with you, sir, the entire 2 years with the amazing folks on 26th Street, Chelsea and Fulton. So, and then just to give an example, we hope we do the same thing at Manhattanville. And Diana Blackwell can take care of herself. She can kick ass better than anybody else as the tenant leaves. You don't have to worry about her. But there's only one Diana Blackwell who can do that. So my question is, when you say, and then Wise Towers, if it wasn't for Rosalba Rodriguez in my office, they would not do anything right at PRC. So they should have had the initial meetings constantly. So for those of us who have not been through this process, you have got to have very intensive tenant, legal aid, NYCHA, city, etc. It's got to be what was done by Corey Johnson and everybody else in that room. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And I don't know that that's what I'm hearing. So I'm not going to say that it's going to happen or not, but Wise Towers is not great because we didn't do that. So that kind of intensive discussion with outside stakeholders is the only way to do it. It's too complicated and there are too many mistakes that get made. So is that what you're planning? Something similar in these RAD conversions? We haven't gotten into the preservation, but I assume they're going to happen whether we like them or not. So.
Well, we have modified the RAD process extensively as a result of Fulton, and we'd be glad to share that with you. It's not exactly anything like sort of the working group model, but there are many elements that we pulled out of that we're now going to do. So we'd be glad to go over those with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would love to go over. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I could go on and on, but I appreciate your leadership.
Well, thank you so much, Councilmember Brewer. Your longstanding leadership in fighting for NYCHA residents. We appreciate that so much. So I guess
Madam Chair, one more thing. People want the second quarterly report that NYCHA has filed with the monitor. I assume you're trying to get it, but I just want to bring that up to you and to NYCHA. Whatever this report is, we'd like to see a copy of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Duly noted and requested on public record. So thank you. I think with that, seeing no other council member questions, we will wrap up the administrative portion and move into public comment. So I want to thank all the NYCHA staff that was here responding to questions and colleagues who were present. So I'm sorry, Councilmember Brewer, if you could put yourself on mute because I think we're hearing background. Thank you.
Yep.
Audrey, I will pass it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Chair. With that, we will now move into the public testimony portion of the hearing. We thank you all so much for your patience to now. Please listen carefully for your name as I will call names on a rolling basis. Each member of the public, in the interest of time, will have the clock set to 2 minutes. And also just a quick reminder that the council will continue to receive written testimony 72 hours after the close of this hearing, and that can be submitted to testimony@council.nyc.gov. So now we will take testimony from Betty, followed by Dana Eldon, and then Viviana Gordon.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon, Chair, Alvarez, and City Council members, and thank you for allowing me to provide the testimony today. My name is Betty Bernhardt. I am a community outreach worker for Red Hook Initiative and also a resident of Red Hook for 20 years. I am here today to ask to support an additional funding for NYCHA this year's budget. As the budget proposed for the mayors includes no additional funding for NYCHA. As an outreach worker at RHI, my job is to support the residents and the needs they may have. I am an advocate for them. During the pandemic, the needs of Red Hook has overwhelmed in addition to financial and health impacts. We have suffered. The condition of Red Hook housing has deteriorated to the point of emergency. Every day I am talking to residents and witnessing apartments such as the photos which I have here is with mold, with ceilings crumbling, leaks, severe floods for months. The hallways are disarrayed, widespread garbage and issues. During the past year, my team and I also helped Red Hook residents with the emergency ERAP applications. As you know, NYCHA is being excluded from the ERAP benefits, and Red Hook residents with back rent from the pandemic are, oh my God, hold on, are overwhelming and scared for months. Okay, with back rent. NYCHA is losing out in funding that needs to improve our homes and our buildings. NYCHA is critical moment and we need the funds now. Councilmember Alvarez, I know that you are a strong advocate for public housing.
Time expired.
I said my testimony anyway, and so you'll find the rest of it in there. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Betty, for your fearless advocacy that I've witnessed as you work with residents throughout Red Hook. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear from Dana Eldon.
Time starts now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for this opportunity to speak before you and others today on the council and to represent the voice of my residents as well as the many constituents that I have grown to know throughout NYCHA housing. As a disabled senior amongst many seniors here at St. Mary's Park Houses, we have charged with the anxiety that NYCHA has presented in the way of the blueprint for change, a bill that was not constructed with the resident leadership. One that takes the freedoms of our residents and rips a page from a repeated past of NYCHA. We have watched over the years how NYCHA and its leadership have made decisions in the past that have affected us for decades. Decades of mismanagement and neglect that have left many to live in squalor and in a state of misery. We have been the victim of abusive practices that have left us with disease and death, regretful to the actions of NYCHA due to COVID-19, mold, asbestos leakages, rotting roofs, and antiquated operating systems, breaking down elevators, and the lack of sufficient repairs to our homes. Our community center that we are not using and cannot be used by our leadership is now sitting, and we don't know exactly what is happening there. Now NYCHA leaves us that each day we are more disparate at the living conditions. And it isn't enough that the state of poverty brings suffrage, but now we live in a fear of homelessness and hopelessness. Our rights are in jeopardy while others skirt their responsibilities to nearly 1 million New Yorkers who depend on Section 9 housing. We depend on public housing. We need our homes. We need our officials to consider the drastic changes that will occur with privatization. And God forbid if Section 18, which can be used, is used to demolish our homes.
Time
We are
expired.
left out.
Please continue, Ms. Eldon.
We are left out in the cold and without any answers from those who promised to represent the people, sworn to represent us. We, the residents of NYCHA, deserve better than this. NYCHA dropped the ball a long time ago, as well as some of our public officials, to protect the homes of my many constituents. As I prepared my testimony today, I was reminded of something Dr. King said 5 days before he was murdered on March 31st, 1968. As he spoke at the National Cathedral in Washington. This is America's opportunity to bridge the gulf between the haves and the have-nots. The question is whether America will do it. There's nothing new about poverty. What is new is that we now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty. So I asked you to please fund Section 9, to please fund NYCHA, with an oversight committee that is independent of NYCHA to see where the money goes and how it is budgeted in the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Eldon.
Thank you. We will now hear from Viviana Gordon.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon, Chair Aviles and members of the Public Housing Committee and everyone else, including some of my colleagues in Red Hook. First, I want to congratulate Chair Aviles because it is so wonderful to have our District 38 council person leading this critically important work. My name is Viviana Gordon and I'm the project director of the Red Hook Community Justice Center, where we work closely with both residents and staff at NYCHA's Red Hook houses. The Justice Center is part of the Center for Court Innovation, which works to create a fair, effective, and humane justice system. We have projects that work with NYCHA communities citywide, including NSI, also known as Local Stat, our sister projects, the Justice Centers in Harlem and Brownsville, Brooklyn, and storefront legal hand sites in the South Bronx, Jamaica, and Crown Heights. So I'll get right to it, that over the past 2 years, we've seen COVID greatly exacerbate NYCHA's capital repairs and skilled trades shortage crisis. Every day in our Housing Resource Center, we work with tenants experiencing egregious and hazardous home repair conditions, including chronic stack leaks, electrical fires, rodent infestation, gas outages lasting for months, black mold, and crumbling walls that exposed lead paint. Unlike residents of private housing who can call 311 and receive a city inspection from HPD, NYCHA residents cannot and must go through housing courts and file an HP action. This has always been an injustice, but with the closure of housing courts during COVID, NYCHA residents were effectively unable to request city inspections to cite code violations. This experience has reinforced our call to City Council for NYCHA to be under HPD oversight, so public housing tenants have the same protections under the City Housing Maintenance Code as private tenants. We've also seen the economic impact of COVID and Red Hook. This past year, we've helped over 800 households file rent adjustments.
Time expired.
And more than 100 file ERAP applications. Thank you very much. As has been mentioned, this past month, NYCHA residents began receiving the letters of effectively their denials, that their ERAP applications were being deprioritized, but at the same time, those very residents are still unable to apply for one-shot deals from HRA and have been put into a horrible position with no rent relief as the eviction moratorium expires. Our ask today, as we are busier than ever, is calling on the council to both support our work and expand the funds for NYCHA tenants and tenant advocacy citywide. We believe in working in coalition with many other amazing community-based organizations and resident leadership, and we urge City Council to increase Schedule C funding for this work in new pots of money or expand existing pots like the Community Housing Preservation Initiative. Our full ask is in the written proposal that we submitted, but I just want to highlight that one of our proposals to council through that initiative is to develop and launch a citywide housing justice corps to expand the effective approach we've been developing in Red Hook for the past 20 years to NYCHA communities citywide. Our proposal would place 10 full-time housing navigators at center projects throughout the city. We believe housing stability and eviction prevention work must be rooted in community, must be credible, accessible, integrated with legal services and city agency resources. The last thing I will say is, as housing courts have reopened, many have heard how incredibly overburdened right to counsel is, and we believe that proposals like this would support right to counsel by facilitating legal referrals, but also providing a lot of affirmative tenant rights education and pre-legal preparation to help tenants organize good facts and evidence to support their counterclaims, as many are withholding rent for repairs, have had to come out of pocket for repairs, and as has been mentioned, are caught in what my colleague calls an ERAP purgatory with no rent relief available to them. Thank you very much for the extra time.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Gordon, for all the work you've done in Red Hook, you and everyone at the Justice Center.
Thank you. We will now hear from Beverly McFarland, followed by Leonel Barragan, followed by Aixa Torres.
Time starts now.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair, so I can testify. I echo Charles Barron said it the best, and Dana Elder said it more. The only thing I see that we have been shot down by NYCHA, we are at war, and all the gunshots that come to us and we have to deal with, all they've been giving us is Band-Aids for our gunshot wounds and not having our apartments or our homes being taken care of. This new transformation plan have only added more high-paying administrators to NYCHA, and NYCHA need to reduce their executive staff headcount so they can increase more revenue for their operational budget. Because how can you have 10 people, 10 administrators supervising 10 staff members? So it's not enough staff in order to get any of this work done. So they're fooling themselves. Gregory Russ, you are the highest paying city worker in this city. And what have they brought you here to do? I believe it is to abolish Section 9. And that's what I believe that you are here for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. McFarlane. Thank you for your testimony and your work. Leonel?
Thank you. We'll now hear from Leonel Barragan, followed by Aixa Torres.
Time starts now.
I had to unmute myself, I'm sorry. Good afternoon, my name is Leonel Barragan. I'm a NYCC employee. I'm currently working for the CPT unit. I would like to read a statement because I know that there's a limited time. Good day, NYCC misappropriates, misuses, and defrauds housing developments, residents, stakeholders, and staff. For decades, NYCC has been paying dubious contractors and consultants without checking the quality, quantity, safety, and health of their construction work. Payments that amount to hundreds of millions and or billions of US dollars. Our knowledgeable staff is denied working on those same projects awarded instead to the same dubious contractors and consultants. NYCC goes further by hiring culprits out of those entities at extravagant salaries while they continue helping their former, in quotes, bosses secure projects and payments. NYCC staff is denied proper treatment, overtime, that include myself and my fellow co-workers, and work that they have no problem, but they have no problem hiring dozens and dozens of overpaid and clueless consultants and insiders. It is well known internally that NYCC works for their independent contractors and not the other way around. Recently, a building that one of those dubious companies was working on was on the verge of collapsing because the general contractor did not shore up its foundations. The Department of Buildings had to intervene and put out a stop work order to prevent possible calamities. Unless that happened, no one at NYCC would have known what was going on because their engineering auditors and field supervisors seldom visit sites or check the quality and content of the work. Engineering auditors and field supervisors are supposed to be licensed registered professionals, and they are mandated by the New York City Controller's Office Directive 2 and Directive 7 to perform periodic in-person inspections, in addition to desk audits. None ever visits sites and relegates the work to lower paid, inexperienced, and unlicensed staff. Plenty of proof of NYCC's poor intention can be provided, and NYCC shall be held accountable for the poor actions, which some say is because it's paperweights. Management just want to show how many projects have been completed, justifying further funding and mismanagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barragan.
Thanks so much. We will now hear from Aixa Torres, and afterwards we will hear from Assemblymember Uline Yo and Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon again. I want to follow up on what we are asking for, which is resident management. And as everybody knows, for the last year and a half, no offense, Mr. Ross, I wanted to be the chairperson of NYCC. I truly believe that when NYCC is run by residents for residents, it works. Yeah. And if anything, the pandemic has proven that we, the residents of public housing, know how to run our developments. We were the ones who got food, got PPE, and did all the negotiating that needed to be done. We advocated for our I apologize. So I asked that part of the funding that we're asking for is for resident management to support us, to allow us to grow, to get the expertise that we need, like accounting or whatever it is that we need to manage our developments so that we can live decently, so that we can get hire contractors that are going to do the work and treat us with dignity, not be treated like third-class citizens. I was at a meeting with a contractor and he felt that he could tell me F you when he asked me a question. To me, that was an insult to not only myself, but to every resident that lives in Alfred E. Smith houses. And so I really want to also tell the council people, please don't get frustrated when we ask you for money and the money's not used in a timely manner. Stay with us.
Time expired.
We're your constituents. We need that money to maintain. And we're the ones who know what needs to be fixed, what doesn't need to be fixed. And we have to be part of the solution. And so that we stand on, we do not want the blueprint because clearly that was done without our conception, it was done from the conception without our input, and it is still being done without our input, really. And so I ask for the council people to support us and to stand by us and give us the funding that we're asking for. I will submit our plan, and so will the CCOP, President of Councils, requesting the money that we want for our developments and how we want the money spent. And I thank you for your time. Chairwoman Aviles, I am so proud that you are chairing and that you have done this meeting today on our behalf so that we can say what we needed to say and put forth our ideas and what our agenda is as residents in public housing. And so I thank all the council people and I thank you for listening to us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Torres. Thank you for your leadership over the decades. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear from Assembly Member Yulai No, followed by Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso.
Thank you so much for giving me the time today. Just wanted to say hello, obviously, to everyone, including my old colleague, Councilmember Barron, and also my one of my tenant association resident presidents, Aixa Torres. I wanted to say, I am the assembly member who represents the 65th Assembly District, which covers the lower Manhattan neighborhoods of the Lower East Side, Chinatown, Battery Park City, South Street Seaport, the Financial District. 1/3 of my district is public housing. I represent a total of 11 NYCHA developments, 45 Allen Street, 175 Eldridge Street, Hernandez Houses, LaGuardia Houses, Lower East Side 1, Meltzer Towers, Rutgers Houses, Seward Park Extension, Smith Houses, Two Bridges, and Vladex Houses. The current situation in NYCHA is both unconscionable and unsustainable. The issue is often described as a $40 billion capital deficit, but residents in our district do not know the issue they face as a deficit in an account book. They know it as broken elevators, as foul odors, as pest infestations, mold outbreaks, chronic hot water outages, heat outages, and lead poisoning. While my office and those of other elected officials work with the authority to address these individual cases as they arrive, they ultimately pile up faster than they resolve. But when NYCHA fails, they do not suffer the consequences. It is our residents that suffer. It is sickening that in the wealthiest city in the country, our public housing residents go underserved and live in inhumane conditions. As a landlord, NYCHA must do better for its residents. NYCHA believes that the path forward is through the blueprint for change, which would transfer apartments from Section 9 to Section 8 and alter NYCHA operations. The response from NYCHA residents has been clear, and I'm here to echo their call. We do not want the blueprint. We do not trust the trust. There are two main reasons for our opposition. The first is the track record of Section 8 housing, and the second is the risk of default. Regarding Section 8 housing, NYCHA tenants have seen the disastrous results of RAD. The program privatized management of several developments, and the result was less transparency and more evictions. I understand that efforts have been made to keep as many protections as possible for our tenants, but the reality is that the only true protection from the dangers and injustices of Section 8 housing is Section 9 housing. We cannot trust that this conversion could be undertaken without harming residents, especially when the program encourages private investment and prevents true accountability for NYCHA's mismanagement with a majority non-resident trust board. Regarding the risk of default, while the blueprint would raise capital funds, it does so at a cost. By issuing bonds against public housing vouchers, it ultimately places units at risk. In the event of a default, bondholders would have the broad leeway to get their return by fleecing the trust for all that it's worth. This might include privatizing buildings or issuing unreasonable financing plans, which could further strain the budget or remove tenant protections. There is no magic money. The resources that the blueprint raises are not a gift or a blessing. They are an investment by private investors who will get their return. It is our public housing system. If our public housing system were to default under the blueprint, it could very well become like Puerto Rico, where years of financial abuse can occur and that residents will have to pay for. While the blueprint supporters assure us that the risk of default is small, remember that NYCHA is almost 100 years old. No one can predict what the risk situation will be 150 or 10 years from now. In fact, the pandemic taught us we cannot even predict the risks we might face this time next year. Chairman Russ and the Blueprint supporters are pushing it for understandable reasons. They say public housing has been waiting on government funding for decades. Yes, they are tired of waiting. They think the government will never pay attention to its public housing residents. If we agree on nothing else, we can agree on this. Our residents cannot wait. We need to change management to resident management. We need to change the procurement process, and we need to protect our tenants. This is why I am here today alongside my fellow state lawmakers from across the city to show you that there is political will. There is political will in Albany to help fund NYCHA using state funds. On our end, we are advocating for an additional $7.2 billion in state money for public housing. In recent years, state appropriations for NYCHA were measured in the low 100 millions, and 10 years ago, they were zero. I will call upon my colleagues in the City Council to be similarly bold in getting as much money as possible for public housing. The political will to fix public housing is stronger in the city, in Albany, and in Washington than it has been in decades. Now is not the time to throw up our hands and settle for a dangerous scheme. We must advocate and push for decisive action at all levels of government to both address the current deficit and ensure that we never again let our public housing deteriorate to this level. Keeping units under Section 9 and increasing public funding is not a way to fix NYCHA problem. It is the only way to address this crisis. And I hope that you will all join me in fighting from City Hall to Albany to Washington and to make sure that we have a real path to funding our public housing system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear from Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Chair Aviles. You're doing a great job. I'm going to read a statement, but this is it's been a very difficult hearing to sit through. Just yesterday, I was in Coney Island at O'Dwyer Houses, handing out hot meals and paying a significant amount of money to maintain it. I want to do it for 3 months because that's how long they're going to be without gas. But I can't afford it. The budget that I have just doesn't allow me to do it. And what we're going to do is relegate NYCHA residents to have to eat out and spend more money out of pocket while they're already struggling with making ends meet. And it's just knowing the deterioration that's happening and the lack of investment that's coming from the city. I really feel like my words are not going to do justice to the amount of investment that we need to really address the crisis that we have. And it truly is a moral imperative. But I want to try my best here. So thank you again, Chair Aviles. I'm Antonio Reynoso, the Brooklyn Borough President. On behalf of Brooklyn's over 118,000 public housing residents, I'm here to advocate for immediate attention to the deteriorating conditions that face them in their homes. The capital budget shortfall is estimated at $40 billion. Last year, thanks to the advocacy of folks like Senator Chuck Schumer and champions like Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, it looked like our public housing residents might finally get a reprieve from our federal government with a $65 billion allocation for public housing written into the Build Back Better proposal. However, the time being, politics has won out over the moral imperative of correcting decades of government disinvestment and neglect, as Senator Joe Manchin called the Build Back Better plan dead. Local government representatives, our responsibility now is not to wait for the federal government to save us. We continue to our advocacy to the Biden administration to invest in public housing. We should be doing everything we can right now to make sure that we're giving at least $2 billion a year from the city and $2 billion a year from the state government every single year until we finally close this gap for NYCHA. It's about putting money into the system and nothing else. It's not about privatization. It's not about new development or finding out great schemes as to how we're going to get out of this hole. Just take money from the $100 million budget and pay down the debt so we can start repairing these NYCHA residents' homes. It's very simple. Just put your money in. Don't wait for matching funds. Do what you're supposed to do. I want to stress that finding solutions to fixing the current state of our public housing is, again, a moral imperative, but NYCHA residents were nearly twice as likely to die from COVID as any other New Yorker. NYCHA must prioritize repairs that affect health, such as mold, lead poisoning, heat, and hot water, and ensure that repairs address underlying conditions so that the same problems don't happen over and over again. Residents also deserve transparency in the repair process. They should be able to utilize the 311 system so that complaints and repairs are tracked and publicly accessible. We must also think beyond just meeting basic needs and start planning to provide services that would improve residents' lives. What would NYCHA campuses look like with green infrastructure, such as urban farms that employ local residents and improve health outcomes, with accessible health clinics and affordable childcare on site, with sustainable waste management practices and stores that sell healthy food? So many common areas in and around NYCHA buildings are underutilized, and we as a city can do better. So again, I'm going to call on the city and state governments to step up to the plate as we continue to put pressure on our federal partners to fund public housing. We need to ensure funding from all levels of government, and it must be allocated regardless of what other levels of government want to do. NYCHA residents are working people, and many of them are essential workers. The city relies on them every single day, and it's long past time to do our part and support them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso. You heard that right, $100 billion city budget. Our current allocation is $587 million. That's unacceptable. We need more money for NYCHA residents. Audrey, thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear from Angel Sassarello, followed by Brendan Cheney, and then Joshua Barnett.
Time starts now.
Thank you for convening this hearing. My name is Angel Sassarello. I'm a NYCHA resident, and I am the Community Center Operations and Engagement Program Director at University Settlement. Since 1886, University Settlement has been providing holistic services to New York families. Currently, we have over 30 program locations across Lower Manhattan and Brooklyn. We provide support ranging from early childhood education to after-school programs, tenant advocacy, and adult programming. My testimony today will focus on the need to fund mental health programming for our NYCHA community members. University Settlement has been privileged to offer programming at multiple NYCHA buildings across the city, including Ingersoll and Atlantic Terminal in Brooklyn and East New York. Settlement houses are unique in our ability to provide holistic services for our community members because we offer robust and diverse programming for the entire family. Settlement houses and other community-based organizations are best situated to partner with the city to bring services to NYCHA residents. Having a trusted community-based organization offer mental health services can remove the stigma around mental health. It also makes it far more accessible for NYCHA residents to have services offered on-site or even in their homes. University Settlement's Families Thriving program is a model that demonstrates our unique position as a bridge between community and institutions. This program offers mental health services to the entire family unit. We believe this program could be deepened and replicated to support more NYCHA members. Families Thriving recognizes the multiple institutions and systems that families interact with daily, from schools to organizations to larger communities. Rather than viewing each institution as system as siloed, Families Thriving is designed to wrap around culturally sensitive family and community support programs with sessions that can occur at home, school, or at the community. We strive to build on our existing success and expand programs like Families Thriving, but without stable funding,
Time
it's a
expired.
challenge. Along with targeted mental health funding, more funding in general for community-based organizations working alongside NYCHA residents could increase hours and essential services for our neighbors. For example, right now, University Settlement Community Centers can only cover limited staffing and hours over the weekend. But the weekend is where many of our NYCHA residents have more time and ability to access the necessary services that we provide. We believe that the investment in NYCHA collaborations with community-based organizations like University Settlement and programs like Families Thriving can revitalize the community centers, making them spaces where community members gather, dialogue, express concerns, and truly build for the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We will now hear from Brendan Chaney, followed by Joshua Barnett, and then Carmen Quinones.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon. My name is Brendan Cheney. I'm the Director of Policy and Communications at the New York Housing Conference. I want to thank Chair Aviles and the members of the Committee on Public Housing for the opportunity to testify. So we were disappointed that Mayor Adams' preliminary budget maintained the status quo for affordable housing in NYCHA. Adams' NYCHA capital budget proposes $1 billion in the current fiscal year and between $400 and $650 million per year in future years. This is insufficient. NYCHA is in crisis. As we all know, they need $40 billion for capital repairs, with tenants living in deplorable conditions that negatively impact their health and quality of life. And since federal funding through Build Back Better is stalled, it has become clear that federal help is not on the way. Therefore, we are calling on the city and state to step up, to coordinate with each other, and to each provide $1.5 billion per year for capital funding for NYCHA at a minimum. This proposal has the support of the United for Housing Coalition, a coalition we are leading of more than 90 organizations. Even with that funding, $15 billion over 5 years, NYCHA will need to get creative to address the $40 billion in repair needs. Absent significant infusion of capital, it will be important for NYCHA to continue implementing their RAD Pact conversion plan, currently the only financing tool to raise capital to make repairs. And to advance the proposed Public Housing Preservation Trust, the Housing Authority should work to gain support from residents and resident organizations. For all plans, the city must include and empower tenants in their decision-making process, and NYCHA's efforts to replicate resident-led RFPs and developer selection are a step in the right direction. Additionally, any new plans to address the issues at NYCHA must be part of the city's overall housing plan. We cannot continue to silo off over 350,000 New Yorkers from the overall housing plan. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you. We will now hear from Joshua Barnett, followed by Carmen Quinones, and then Ramona Ferreira.
Time starts now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councilmember Aviles, thanks very much for holding this very important hearing. My name is Josh Barnett. I'm a union representative with Local 375, DC 37 AFSCME, and a NYCHA employee. I've been an architect in the design department and capital projects since 1999. What I would hope would come out of this hearing are calls for a strong increase in funding at all levels, an end to privatization, increased oversight, and plans for a full audit of NYCHA's books. NYCHA is currently caught between underfunding, mismanagement, and privatization. 40 years of disinvestment has led to a $45 billion backlog on capital repairs, and also a loss of staff from almost 16,000 workers in the 90s to under 12,000 today. The number of architects, construction inspectors, etc., has gone from 450 to 250, but we see hundreds of consultants on the payroll. And we deal every day with top-heavy, inefficient mismanagement. The solution for everything seems to be just to add a new vice president. Those of us involved in producing renovations are literally outnumbered by the managers who monitor our work. It takes weeks just to generate a single inspection for hazardous materials. And privatization, as people have said, threatens the existence of public housing in New York City. RAD is removing 1/3 of NYCHA's housing stock as public housing. The proposed switch from Section 9 to Section 8 threatens the rest. Plus, we see union busting out work with RAD, sacrificing wages, benefits, and resident hiring. Projects and jobs are outsourced to consultants, displacing union staff at great cost to the residents and taxpayers, but it's a calculation NYCHA consistently leaves out of its annual plan. In a city ravaged by gentrification, NYCHA is more vital than ever. Housing is a right, not a commodity. We need a Green New Deal for public housing, and we know the money is there. The rich and developers in this city here rack up record profits and yet remain untaxed. As people have said, the money is there to allocate if efficiency is increased. We need more funding. We need more funding desperately, but it has to go to residents and staff, not to managers and consultants, so the city will retain the diversity and affordability we so desperately need. And we look forward for the union's input on weighing in on this vital issue. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. We will now hear from Carmen Quinones, followed by Ramona Ferreira, and then Aaron Burns-Main.
Time starts now.
You know, we keep going over and over this all over again. And until we find out where the money is going, nothing is going to change. That's why we are looking seriously at resident management, because RAD, PAC, and Blueprint is not the move. We need to take over our own developments and hope that everybody will back us up in doing that. The residents are already doing the work. There's nothing else really to be said other than we need to run our own developments. We need to create all the RMCs as leaders, because this is not working. NYCHA is not working. We don't know where the money is going. We don't know nothing from nothing anymore. And as the speaker before said, you keep hiring management, consultant. That's where all the money is going to. And while we're living in broken down apartments, pipes busting all over the place, leaks all over the place, where is the money? We need to get an account of where this money has been going. We also want to make sure that those books are open so that we can, transparency is one of the biggest things that we need, the transparency. Again, we need resident management corporations. That's what we need. And we're hoping that the elected officials and everybody comes on board to that. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. We will now hear from Ramona Ferreira, followed by Aaron Burns-Main, and then Jesse Fields.
Time starts now.
Hi, everyone. Happy International Women's Day. Just want to recognize how many of the speakers talking about this issue today and doing the heavy lifting in public housing are women. And I want to thank all of you for, making time to talk about public housing and the conditions that we're in. What's really important to me today is actually making sure that we get on the record that I've requested a forensic audit from the Office of the Comptroller and also from City Council and from this committee. And secondly, one thing I didn't include with that request is that we want to better understand, now that we know that NYCHA is only spending 6% of the funding that it actually receives from the city, I think it's important for us to understand how much money they have that has not been committed, and that we stop using the number of 40 billion because it is just not accurate and it's not current. That number was created by NYCHA a couple of years back. And since then, we've seen some critical capital malfunctions that really are going to raise that number. So the two questions I'm going to leave the NYCHA staff with today is, how much money do you actually have that is not committed? And secondly, what is the estimated need of NYCHA in 2022? Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear from Aaron Burns-Main, followed by Jesse Fields and John Forster.
Time starts now.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you, Chair and Council members, for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Aaron Burns-Main. I'm Vice President of Policy and Advocacy and Chief of Staff with the Community Preservation Corporation. This hearing has covered the depth of the crisis at NYCHA and the fact that the federal government is not offering NYCHA the funding it needs to preserve public housing long-term. It's time for us as New Yorkers to step up and provide the funding for capital repairs, as well as the legislative solutions to ensure NYCHA's long-term financial stability. First, we stand with United for Housing, calling on the city to provide $1.5 billion in capital annually, and the state should match that commitment to begin to address these urgent repair needs. Second, we also need to work together to advance the trust for public housing to create the fully public conversion process, allowing NYCHA to leverage debt for repairs, use tenant protection vouchers for a deeper level of subsidy, and overhaul the bureaucratic procurement issues that are keeping them from delivering faster repairs. To address resident concerns, the city should support proof of concept pilot with a set number of units and a required third-party evaluator tracking implementation. Lastly, NYCHA should continue along with RAD PAC conversions for the buildings that are in desperate need of repair in collaboration with tenants. We saw a bright spot towards the end of last year, which was announced. Over the last few years, residents of Fulton and Elliott Chelsea worked closely with the city, NYCHA, and other stakeholders to evaluate different solutions for their developments. They directed the decision-making in the planning process and eventually selected the development team. This meaningful engagement process can be successful in other communities. It's time for us to work together and use every tool at our disposal to finally deliver better quality of life for NYCHA residents. Thank you for your time and consideration. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. We will now hear from Jesse Fields, followed by John Forster and Joel Kupferman.
Time starts now.
Thank you very much. And thanks to the chair, Councilwoman Aviles. And I agree so much with the sentiment of against privatization. My name is Jesse Fields. I'm a medical doctor in the Harlem community. I'm affiliated with Mount Sinai Doctors Faculty Practice at 147th and Frederick Douglass. And I'm also a member of the Committee for Independent Community Action, which was founded about 10 years ago by Dr. Fulani. I support everything that the Councilman Barron was saying earlier, and the residents are clearly against privatization. I'm part of building a movement around the city of people, the residents, people who live in public housing, activists, tenant association presidents, as well as people who don't live in public housing. We're bringing people together to make the statement that we want this city to be a place where everybody can live, not only the rich. And it seems to me that the residents of public housing are leading that fight against privatization, against further gentrification and displacement. We've been petitioning for years. Since we now have a new mayor, we've started a new petition drive. We collected 20,000 signatures against privatization, against Next Gen, et cetera, in the previous mayor, under the previous mayor. Our petition now, since we have a new mayor, we've collected over 2,000 signatures opposing all forms of privatization of public housing, opposing RAD, PAC, Blueprint, keeping public housing public, keeping Section 9, and supporting, as Carmen Quinones was saying, supporting resident management, the residents being able to run their buildings, their developments. They live there. We need to support the people who live in public housing. Across this country, public housing has been demolished. New York City has the largest public housing and pretty much the only really public housing
Time expired.
here. So we have to set an example for the country. We have to fight to keep public housing public and to protect the residents. That's what it's all about. The privatization plans, RAD, PAC, Blueprint, they're all investment opportunities for investors, but they don't invest in public housing in the residents. And that's what we need to do. And I want to work with everybody to keep building that movement and taking that spirit out across the city. Thank you. Thank you for this really important hearing.
Thank you. We will now take testimony from John Forster, followed by John Kupferman and Crystal Gooding.
Time starts now.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, and especially thank you, Chair Avalos, for holding the hearing. My name is John Forster. I'm a representative with Local 375, which is part of District Council 37 here in New York City, and also a member of the NYCHA Coalition. I represent over 200 architects, engineers, and project managers who work at NYCHA, and they are there for the long haul. They have an ongoing commitment to the residents in NYCHA. Many of them work in the field throughout the period of COVID. Others were able to work quite effectively remotely as they reviewed plans and contracts and continue to do so. It is interesting that at this point they're not allowed to do that, even though NYCHA managers are being allowed to work remotely 3 days a week. The hypocrisy there is stunning. I also represent architects and engineers in many other agencies, and I have to say NYCHA is probably the least responsive in terms of labor relation issues. NYCHA clearly needs additional money, but at the same time, NYCHA is also wasting money. The constant contracting out costs the city more every single time that they do that. It is also often less effective than working with in-house staff. Private consultants are expensive. RAD is wasting money and is privatizing public housing at a time when we need to increase it, not decrease it. A specific example internally within NYCHA is we have a union contract that allows for, in disciplinary cases, pretrial hearings that would resolve many, many cases. But does the legal department allow for that? No, they go ahead and they want a full-blown trial with all the expenses of attorneys, representation, et cetera. It's amazing sometimes how these things work. We are requesting a forensic audit of NYCHA. I also want to point out that the blueprint, by the way, also allows for the negating of union contracts. And I hope that full tenant protections have now been restored. But if there are, and there should be any further discussions regarding the blueprint, then the unions must also be involved with that. And finally, I just want to request again how it is that we see these new approaches to capital funding, allowing for the hiring of better contractors. I'm not convinced that's going to happen, and I'm really concerned about the quality of contractors at this point. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share this with all of you.
Thank you. We will now hear from Joel Kupferman, followed by Crystal Gooding and Sean Campion.
Time starts now.
There we go. Thank you very much. I'm Joel Kupferman. I'm an executive director and senior attorney at the Environmental Justice Initiative, counsel to Alfred E. Smith and St. Nick's, tenant associations, and labor and community advocate that's been at this game for many, many years. My experience with Smith goes back to 9/11, and the damage that 9/11 caused still continues to do so. In the age of COVID, NYCHA requires more control, not less, as indicated by their improper NYCHA practices by the contractors. Unfettered but hardly paid contractors continue to endanger the health of not only tenants but workers. Smith alone had $85 million from a FEMA contract. That money was paid to a contractor that repeatedly caused major tree destruction, but also with ongoing soil destruction. That destruction of the soil went into the air and was dragged into apartments, which greatly increased COVID mortality. A slight increase in exposure to dust leads to a major increase in COVID mortality. Bad design and compliance was also rewarded. ADA non-compliant locking wheelchair-bound residents are forced to be trapped at Smith when storm wall barriers would be placed. NYCHA should also look at all their procurement in terms of ADA compliance. One of the ways that they should institute better vendor management is instituting the bad actor policy. The city and the state has used this to control and disallow bad contractors from being hired and also being paid. The tree destruction at Smith could definitely be prevented. And also—
Time expired.
Okay, I just want to finish up with 2 sentences. Whistleblowers have come to me and they've told me that there's definitely illegal work that's going on in terms of asbestos removal and the like. And not only that, NYCHA can't even provide safe workplaces for where their inspection staff comes out of. The city, NYCHA could seek federal and state resources. OSHA has offered a partnership program in which they can come in and come up with a whole worker safety program. NYCHA has refused to institute that. There's state resources, city resources should be used, including HPD and health department. And I think it's important to point out to city council members that 311 system has failed NYCHA residents. Many times residents have called up to make complaints to health department and the like, and they were told that they should go to NYCHA and not city agencies. The buildings department, tenant protection bureau and plans that were instituted by city council is not being used. There is not enough monitoring, not enough compliance at these places. And some of the solutions is, according to what's mandated by the federal Baez case, is that the tenants and the NYCHA staff could work together by programs including HEPA vacuums and steamers, which would lead to total reduction of exposure to lead dust that's in many, many apartments.
Thank you. We will now hear from Crystal Gooding, followed by Sean Campion and Gregory Morris.
Time starts now.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm a resident of a Section 8 building in the Lower East Side, and I'm also a member of Freedom Agenda. So I'm here today to discuss firsthand how much the community needs funding and how beneficial it will be in the long run. To start, throughout the pandemic, myself and many of my neighbors have had to come out of pocket to take care of the community, to keep ourselves afloat while we live a block away from a luxury building. During this pandemic, my partner has also been suffering through the hell that is Rikers Island. There's no reason that my neighbors and I should have to deal with vibration in the building, holes and cracks in the wall, mice that run over people while they sleep. And we actually had a few people jump off of our roof and commit suicide during the pandemic. While money goes into things that are super unnecessary, like the ridiculously high DOC budget, New York City is now spending over $556,000 per year per incarcerated person, but so many officers stay home abusing their sick leave. I visit Rikers basically weekly, and I hear the correction officers being paid about bragging so much, all the things that they buy while having to do so little. As a resident of public housing and a person impacted by Rikers Island, I'm shocked, but I do want to say I'm amazed that us people within housing, we have so little, but we do so much for each other. So imagine if we had the funding, what could bloom from all of this trapped talent that we have. They're now planning to build literally on top of my building, 265 Cherry Street. And that means they're taking away our park, our community center, our garage, our emergency exit, and most importantly, our windows. So they're gonna board in our windows with no sunlight and have a luxury building in front and on top of our home. So we have up until the 26th floor, and they wanna build until the 60th floor. So we worry about dust, we worry about cancer, and mental health issues literally due to greed. Last summer,
Time expired.
I with my 2 children, and a man literally landed in front of me because he jumped off the 26th floor, and life went on like nothing. There are many young men within the community that need a place to go. They ask me constantly if I know anywhere that's hiring or if there's a way that I could help them enroll in programs. These are services that should be provided to people for free throughout NYCHA developments. These youth, I don't know if anyone has spoken to them, but they're trapped talent. Many of them suffering from generational trauma with no way out. There needs to be programs for our youth. There needs to be open jobs and funds going right into building a better future for those who desperately need it and just don't know where to start. These are outcasts of the community and the people mislabeled because of where they live. A lot of this already out of their control and dated back many years before them. Not to mention how those held on Rikers Island have no opportunities for housing, no services for their mental health, substance abuse issues, no classes to help them now return to society, and their children and families families are left trying to pick up the pieces. I know that if the funds are not provided for what the community needs, it is not because there isn't enough money, but because elected officials put law enforcement unions ahead of people in need. So to sum it up, we really do need our allies in the city council to make sure that this does not happen again this year, and really to just support us because we are out here trying.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gooding. And I have to tell you, real public safety is investing in our people, investing in our housing, investing in our healthcare, investing in our education, our young people. It is not correctional and incarceration institutions, correctional institutions. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We will now hear from Sean Campion, followed by Gregory Morris.
Time starts now.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Aviles and members of the committee, and thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm Sean Campion. I'm a senior research associate at the Citizens Budget Commission. It's a nonpartisan think tank dedicated to constructive change in New York City and state governments. I'll focus today on NYCC's operations and finances. It's giving highlights some of our full testimony, which we've submitted to the council and is on our website at cbcny.org, along with our previous research on NYCCA. So while attention is rightly paid to NYCCA's deteriorating buildings and the need for more capital funding, NYCCA's operations and financial outlook are also highly stressed. And that threatens its ability not only to serve its residents, but also the ability to preserve public housing. NYCCA's turnaround plans also depend on its ability to stabilize its finances and transform itself into a modern and efficient property management organization. Our analysis of NYCCA's budget shows that it faces at least 7 fiscal and operational risks in 2022 and beyond, many of which have been highlighted already, including ballooning operating costs, which are more than $1,300 per unit now and are growing 3 times as fast as revenue over the last decade, a plummeting rent collection rate, which could increase NYCCA's budget gap if it continues, continued reliance on city subsidies, up to $257 million last year, dwindling operating reserves, the diversion of capital subsidies to the operating budget for critical repair needs, the growing cost of unfunded mandates from its settlement agreement with HUD, which was upwards of 10% of the operating budget last year. The federal government hasn't provided any funding for those obligations, and the failure to secure savings either through operating reforms or in collective bargaining. And 2 things that we like to highlight to help stabilize the operating budget, improve operations, are approval of the trust, which not only brings capital and but also can improve management and reduce operating costs. And also labor productivity increases by working with the federal monitor and HUD and labor to redouble efforts to boost productivity and bring operating costs more in line with other housing authorities and private property managers, and to ensure that NYCCA can self-manage developments going forward in the Preservation Trust. Thank you, and happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Gregory Morris.
Time starts now.
Thank you for this opportunity to testify, Councilmember Aviles, for your leadership. I am the Chief Program Officer at Goddard Riverside Community Center. Goddard serves as many as 30,000 New Yorkers. We're physically embedded within a number of public housing developments, Isaac's Houses, Holmes Towers. We have a location at Taft, Great to see Beverly. We're at Amsterdam Houses and Wise Towers as well. And in each of those locations, we do some of what's been discussed here already, which is we provide a wealth of services from early childhood to older adult services and everything in between. Listen, I'm not going to get into my testimony here. I'm just going to say the following thing. As a community-based not-for-profit, the reality is we're in the same position that many of folks who live in the developments are, and that is we operate within facilities, within NYCCA locations that are challenged. Whether it's heat, hot water, whether it's the rats, whether it's holes in our ceiling, or whether it's holes in our ceilings or basements we can't get into to fix things, we're challenged in a way that prevents us from being able to do the work that we are committed to doing, which is meeting the needs of the residents of the development. And when we do it right and we do it well and we do it in collaboration, it can make a tremendous difference in people's lives. Without a commitment, without the resources to be able to fix things, it could take us years to get NYCCA to fix our community centers. Every council member has a community center in its district in a NYCCA development that is suffering tremendously. And we call on the council, this new council, to be able to make a financial commitment. $5 million, we think, would make a huge difference in being able to make our buildings work better so we create the environments that residents need to thrive and be successful over time. I guess I also want to say, I think it would be really beneficial. There's lots of capital projects in the pipeline that have been specific to NYCHA developments that you've heard about, have not been worked on. NYCHA didn't have a very good answer for those either. We need to cut through the bureaucratic red tape and try to solve those problems. Last but not least, as Councilmember Brewer mentioned, this is an opportunity to come together and try to figure out how it is that this new council works in partnership with residents, works in partnership with community-based providers, works in partnership with residents and the community to be able to really think about how to keep our centers open, to keep meeting needs, to try to figure out how residents have pathways to economic mobility and stability, to take ownership of their developments. Because the reality of this is, I've been on a lot of these hearings over the years, a lot of stuff we're hearing, it's the same over and over and over. And Councilmember Aviles, I welcome the opportunity to speak with you and your team and the new council to figure out pathways to fix things, to make them better, and to do it in a way that's sustainable and respectful of our residents and our communities, our community centers. Thank you.
Thank you. I look forward to doing that work with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I believe this concludes the public testimony portion of the hearing. If there are any other members of the public who have not yet had a chance to speak and we've inadvertently missed you, please use the Zoom raise hand function now and we will hear from you now. So again, we are asking for those members of the public who haven't yet testified. Seeing none, Chair Aviles, I will turn it back to you to close the hearing.
So I just want to thank you all for attending, especially our NYCHA residents and members of the public who've offered, their critical perspective today, their experience, their passion and commitment. And yes, it is a frustrating, persistent conversation that we have been having over the years. And I can tell you, our commitment is to try to push through. I believe in keeping public housing public. And we will work with the residents. We will work with our nonprofit providers. We will work with everyone who wants to work with us to make sure we do right by our public housing residents who deserve to live in dignified housing. So I thank you for your patience. I thank you for just putting forward all your good work, again, to the staff who has been here for hours on end today. I appreciate your work very much. And I look forward to the conversations ahead. We will be organizing our oversight hearings based on what the residents want to do and where we want to dive in. And we've gotten a lot of good work that has come out of this hearing that will definitely set the tone for how we will be moving forward for sure. So we will be in touch. Please contact our office, District 38 at councilnyc.gov. And we look forward to working with you. And again, thank you to my courageous colleague, Councilmember Barron, who stood here through the entire time. I appreciate you. And I guess that concludes our first hearing. Yay.